Ladies and gentlemen, if I could get your attention, please. We are going to call to order the May 3rd, 2019 Governing Board meeting of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. We're going to ask this morning if Supervisor Rutherford would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sure, it'd be my honor. Please stand, place your hand over your heart. Let's salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, does any of the board members have any opening comments this morning? Supervisor Hott.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk about a great conference that I was asked to make a big announcement at last week, the ACT Expo, held in Long Beach. And this is where all the industry comes together to focus on clean air technology, particularly as it relates to the goods movement industry. And it was really great for me because, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if it was the last meeting and the time before, you remember long before, oh, look, they got photos. Long before I was even, elected, I talked about the black soot that I could see on my windowsills living in San Pedro. And I come to represent the harbor area, San Pedro, Wilmington, and every single one of my political jobs. We refer to it as the diesel death zone in that area. More people have asthma and lung-related diseases almost than anywhere else. And mainly because of the good movement industry, because of the cargo, because of the ships, because of the trucks. And AQMD got a lot of love at this conference because you all know AQMD is from 1988 to 2018, we've contributed more than $320 million to co-fund $1.5 billion in low-emission transportation RD&D projects. And I got to announce that AQMD partnered with Daimler Trucks to fund the development of these heavy-duty battery electric trucks, something that I have really been hoping for, asking for, praying for the longest time. We were told the technology does not exist for these long-haul trucks to have enough torque, to carry this cargo. And we got to see Daimler's new fully electric Class 6 EM2 straight truck and a battery electric Class 8 E-Cascadia truck that were there on the floor, on the showroom of the convention center in Long Beach. But I got to make the announcement that I said any electric vehicle driver out there knows your car is only as good as the charger, as the charging station. And we unveiled this heavy-duty, truck-capable DC fast charging station. It was in La Mirada, so we did a satellite switching over to La Mirada where they unveiled this huge charging station that would accommodate these giant electric cargo handling trucks. So it was really very exciting, and it was exciting to be in a room of industry experts and really smart people who are trying to figure out, how we can continue to lower the emissions as it relates to goods movement in this country. I mean, 40% of all the trade in this country comes through those twin ports. And yet, just that morning, there was yet another report that said we had the dirtiest air in the country. So while we're making great strides, it was really heartwarming for me now that I'm a member of AQMD to know how much this agency has really contributed and funded this technology that one day we really will be zero emissions at both those ports. So it's very exciting. I never thought I'd get so excited about a charging station.
Something new every day.
Right?
Mayor Mitchell?
Thank you. I'm going to let Dwight Robinson explain his role at ACT Expo, but on the day before ACT Expo opened, I attended a press event and represented the California Resources Board there, and that was Toyota collaborated with Kenworth and Shell with money from various sources, CARB included, to introduce 10 fuel cell trucks into the port operations at the Port of LA. And they're planning 2 fuel cells stations for fueling, one in Wilmington and one in Ontario. So they are planning, with a 300-mile range on these trucks, to do some not only local drayage operations, but also some trips out to the Inland Empire, to the inland ports, the distribution centers out there. So that was pretty exciting also. But it was an exciting week altogether with ACT Expo in town. And I urge anybody who's interested, whether you're on this board or not, to drop into the ACT Expo and see what is on the floor and what they're doing, because some very exciting new technologies are coming to our ports, coming to our city. And Janice is right that the same thing, on the same day we were doing this, we got the announcement that Los Angeles has the dirtiest air in the nation, and so that's a sobering thought. But I also got to watch Dwight introduce a new project down in the port, and he, along with Hector de la Torre, did a great job on those announcements. So I'm going to let Dwight, not steal his thunder, let Dwight talk about that. Thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. I also had a chance to attend ACT Expo, and there were some exciting things that occurred. First of all, I heard a lot of positive comments about Supervisor Hahn's announcement there, and people were really excited about that and that switch over to the La Mirada facility. So a lot of positive comments. People are very excited. Similarly about what's going on with Toyota, and I had an opportunity to participate in the press event with Volvo. And what's so exciting about all this, as many of you know, I actually own 23 Class 8 heavy-duty trucks myself. And, so I'm happy to see that the technology continues to advance. And we're seeing that over the last few years with a lot of smaller companies, a lot of startups that are really pushing the industry forward. But realistically, if the major manufacturers aren't participating, then we're not going to be able to scale quickly enough. So the one hydrogen company, the one company that's got fuel cells, has had them out for a while, and there's Toyota, and then there's the other one, Nikola. I reached out to them about 1.5 years ago about potentially buying some trucks for my own business, and the email response that I received about 1.5 years ago was that they had a 7-year waiting list. So again, we're talking about startups, which again, they're pushing technology forward. They're pushing even the big companies to try to do something, but their ability to scale just isn't at that level. When we start hearing companies like Daimler, Toyota, and Volvo, we know that they're going to be able to do that. And so it's exciting that we're able to participate with them to try to make sure that they can prove out the concept and they can get into mass production. So Hector de la Torre from the CARB board presented me representing the board in the district here with a $44 million check, oversized check that we had. So I tried to take it to the bank, but it's they wouldn't take that one. So I'm sure Matt or Wayne have it. And but it's going to fund the trucks that are going to be tested in the port. I think the date for their release, they're given over to the companies that are going to test them, is going to be this November. Then they'll be out on the road later this year and next year, starting to actually look at how well the technology is working. Are they able to do what the industry needs them to do? And then hopefully, very quickly thereafter, we'll see some large-scale commercial development and production put into the ports. And we need the charging stations for that. We need all the infrastructure. But I'm just very encouraged to see these large-scale companies that are now getting involved, and it's very exciting. So, also one other thing separate from ACT Expo, I had a chance yesterday, along with Supervisor Hahn, to attend Councilmember Buscaino's State of the District, and very good turnout. And I'm always impressed by Councilmember Buscaino, and so he did a fantastic job, and hopefully he'll be there this morning, so that, be here this morning, so that
No,
I
he's
can
wiped
tell
out.
him.
He's not, he told me he's not
Okay,
coming.
he won't make it. Well, just to tell him, what a great job he did. So it's
Yeah,
been
I
a
told him
pleasure serving with all of you, and I've really enjoyed my time on this board for sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, one of the things I did forget when you were all talking about the trucks, these electric trucks, they will be piloting a program at the ports. I think there's going to be 5 of them that will be having a year pilot program to see whether or not they do what they're going to do. So we're going in the right direction. I'm really pleased about that.
Supervisor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. So on Wednesday, my staff member, James Dinwiddie, and I had an opportunity to tour the ports of LA and Los Angeles. It was my first time. And, you hear of these stories from the past, but I was extremely impressed with the operations there, seeing how everything works, and really inspired by some of the things they're implementing with regard to efficiencies and technology, and had a chance to take a look at the bonnets on the stacks and see how that operates. But very impressed with what they've got in the planning stage now and what they're looking for the future to really help get towards those zero emissions with the vehicles and all of the equipment and things that they're going to be rolling out in the not too distant future. And then the bridge, of course, is in partial construction at this point, and it will be a lot higher to accommodate the newer hopefully less emissions with regard to the cargo ships that will be coming in to the ports. But just like a lot of things in life, things are getting bigger when they get better. So it was great to get that indication of what they're working towards from the environmental perspective, but also from a business perspective. And when the cargo comes in and how everything is disseminated from there to the automated cargo cars that takes it to where the trucks are, and how they're working with the trucking industry to make sure that the vehicles are getting towards a zero-emission type of vehicles as well. So everything was very clean in the water and on land, and very impressed with the operations there, and look forward to my next tour, because there's always more things that they're working on. But I was really excited to see what was in place there, and again, very impressed with what's going on.
Mr. Caccione?
Mr. Chair, just maybe a question for the people that attended ACT. I missed it this year, but have been in past years. And I know as we do the development of the heavy-duty vehicles, medium-duty vehicles, there's a new category that I saw a picture of, and I just want to get your opinion, because we have also the refuse industry, the waste haulers, and we made all these to transition from diesel to compressed natural gas. And I saw a picture of it was a BYD, a large electric dump truck. Is that accurate? Can you tell me about that? Because there's several agencies. I looked even outside. We've got Waste Management, the 2 dumpsters. I saw Waste Management in Valley Vista. We contract with probably here. Our city, many of them, Athens or Waste Management is one of the biggest. And so many of them have the compressed natural gas, but maybe it's time now as we're transitioning our supporting buses from CNG to electric, maybe not with the waste industry. Is it feasible, did you guys see, or did anybody have a chance to look at that?
I saw the truck on the showroom floor, so,
Okay.
but to be honest with you, I can't tell you whether it was all electric or it was fuel cell or, but yeah, absolutely, it's doable. The technology exists. That all these large vehicles that traverse our communities should be, and I think they absolutely can be, zero emissions. But I don't know what one they were showing on the.
Matt, do you know whether it looked like a
showroom.
BYD?
So there are several manufacturers that have prototype garbage haulers that are electric. So Mack had one, I think you're right, BYD, Transpower, they're all testing them. I think part of it is to identify, as Supervisor Hahn said, the fueling infrastructure. Because right now, if you have a landfill to natural gas, it perhaps makes more sense for them to do RNG. So they're in the development phase.
And the other issue I had, it was interesting, I was reading an article in the electrification that now in the airline industry, aircraft industry, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, in Seattle it maybe, or Portland, they've developed for their short-haul flights, which they say actually are the majority of flights in the world are short-haul flights between interstate, things like that. Electric planes are in the development and demonstration process, and they figure its advancements are so quick on the smaller planes and mid-sized planes that in the next several years we can have electric aircraft. Is anybody aware of that on staff, Wayne? Have you heard?
Yeah, we've heard that there's research into that, and it's exactly the niche that you're talking about, sort of that small segment, like here to San Francisco,
Right.
Sacramento. There's a lot of advancement in Europe, primarily, as I understand it. I don't know, maybe Matt might have more to add.
Just exactly what Wayne said. I think they're looking at how they can deploy smaller planes for passenger service.
And as we look at as Supervisor Hans said, I mean, we've given away so much money over the last 20 years, whether it's to the bus companies. You know, when I go to my cities, I say, look, here in the last 20 years, we've given away $200 million to the companies to transition from diesel to compressed natural gas. And I say also in the last year, we started 50 buses, electrification. But maybe we should even start looking at aircraft. We've got all the Ontario, Burbank, LAX, et cetera. It may be an area where funneling some of that over to the aircraft industry because that's a big source of air pollution. Even in our goods movement too now, carrying goods back and forth.
Yeah, within our air quality management plan and kind of what we're working with regards to the facility-based mobile source measures, we're actually looking at not only heavy-duty truck emissions, but locomotive emissions, and really trying to go, and I think the mantra is, we want to go to zero where it's possible and where it's feasible. And to the extent that we can do that, we can push that envelope. I think then becomes a question of timing with regards to how we make those investments. And I think a lot of this early work that's been done is sort of proof of concept and sort of advancing. I think ultimately we will get to the stage where on, for instance, electric planes, because within the AQMD and within some of the spending plans that we've looked at, in order to move into attainment, we are going to have to address the aircraft. We are going to have to address the trucks. We are going to have to address the ships, the locomotives.
Yeah.
All of those need to be addressed. They all need to get to zero.
Can I say one more thing? Janice wants to talk again. I heard that, Judy.
Supervisor Hahn?
I'm the vice chair for a moment here. I'm helping.
No, the chair for a
I
moment.
just,
It's okay.
I mean, I'm really glad we're having this discussion, but it really is about the infrastructure long-term to support this technology. And I'm going back to Washington, D.C. next week, and everyone is talking about this trillion, at least, dollar infrastructure bill. And I think we ought to always keep talking about this is the infrastructure that AQMD is thinking about. It's not just roads and bridges and highways. It is about charging stations across the country that could help, allow for this new technology to exist. Without the infrastructure, it's never going to work. So when we talk about whether it's the state or the federal government, we need to have a message about this kind of infrastructure, charging stations for all these different technologies. Thank you.
So Supervisor, we actually have been going back to DC and talking about the Clean Air Infrastructure Fund that would be part of a national infrastructure fund.
Of course you have.
So we'll be giving you the talking points for that because I think it's,
You think I need talking points?
well,
Who do you think you're dealing
we'll
with?
wish you the best of luck and look forward to when you bring back the money.
I think we're very lucky to have you here. Time is an amazing thing, I was sitting in this exact chair when a very good friend of mine who's sitting where Supervisor Perez is sitting now admonished Dennis Yates, who was the mayor of Chino, for being enthusiastic about electric cars because he said electric cars are just a fad. They will never be anything significant. I don't think that's right. I didn't think it was right then. I know it's not right now. But what you have to be cautious of is that there's a company in France right now who's working on a propulsion system that will move both cars and airplanes by air, the utilization of air. It's not compressed air, it's just air. So since they were located in Monte Carlo, I naturally ran right to the factory. I ran right to the factory. But it is the most amazing thing. Tata, who is the transportation mega giant in India, gave them $50 million for the rights for air-driven taxis in India. And they were there, and they were beginning to produce it. So I have been waiting now. It's because that was a couple of years ago. I've been waiting to see. The problem in the United States is that the people who approve the safety of vehicles are not approving the bumpers and the body shells that these people are using on these cars. But to think that you could have a car that ran on air, that's just absolutely insane. So, and the price point, these cars were running about $9,500. Now, they weren't big cars, trust me. They were little tiny cars like they use in Europe, but $9,500, I could afford that, you know? Are there any other comments by any of my colleagues? Other than Janice Rutherford wants on mobile source. I got it, every 5 minutes, I got that. Okay, then I'm gonna swear in our newest appointee. And Paul, are we gonna do it down there? Down there, okay. I want you to know that I didn't want the person to leave that you're replacing.
I understand that.
And I want you to know that you were not my first choice to fill this role. But I want you to know that once you were appointed, I was the happiest guy in my block. So I welcome you with open arms. I look forward to your tenure here and the things that you're going to do, because I know that you're going to be a special board member. After talking to you for less than 2 hours, I knew you understood. So it's my honor to swear you in this morning, and we'll share this. How's that?
That sounds good.
Derek, stop looking at me like that. Derek is your biggest fan.
Oh, okay.
I state your name.
I, Vanessa Delgado,
Do solemnly swear at such times
do solemnly swear at such times
I hold the above office.
I hold the above office.
Do solemnly swear or affirm
I do solemnly swear or affirm
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California.
and the Constitution of the State of California,
That I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
If you're not going to read it, I'll take the thing down and
I've
see
done
how you
this
do it.
before, yeah.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties that I'm about to enter.
Congratulations. Welcome
Thank
aboard. You
you.
did it better than me.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't you say a few words, Connie?
Well, first off, I do want to thank the Senate Pro Tem and my former colleagues in the Senate of California for this honor to serve on this board. I take this challenge really with excitement and humility. And I think we can all agree in this room that Southern California and Los Angeles is used to being the first and the best of many things, but being the most polluted area is not a title we want to continue to hold. So I am excited to join this community of stakeholders, business leaders, union labor leaders, our talented staff, and my new colleagues in trying to achieve our air quality goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we do the election of the vice chair. Another
Mr.
thing I
Chairman,
didn't want to do. you
Mr.
have to
Chairman,
do.
I would like to nominate Ben Benoit to be the vice chair. He's the most experienced one on our board at that job, and he did a fine job of it before, and would think it would be great to reinstate him to be vice chair.
I'll second that
of our
motion.
board.
Okay, we have a motion for Mr. Benoit and a second. Are there any other nominees?
Move to
Then-
close the
then-
nominations.
Then I will conclude that this is a election by acclamation. And Mr. Benoit, would you come move?
Oh, I didn't know you had to move. I'm taking my vote back.
I can still help you from there.
Well, who's that sits next to you?
This is Joe.
Well, let's switch you and Joe. Everybody, we're going to do the June Taylor dancer things. So now you got to move one down, okay? And the vacant chair at the end will belong to the, okay. Will belong to the Senate, to the governor's appointee when he or she arrives. Okay, Mr. Nastri, items, do you have any comments?
No, sir.
Nope. Well, then we'll take items 1 through we're going to take items 1 through 9. We'll take items 1 through 26. What's that? Oh, okay. I don't think we're going to have an issue. Mr. Etter, you have requested to speak on item 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 13, 17, and 18. Why don't, do we have any other, I don't see any other people. Oh, we have some people on 3, 1, 3. I think that's it, 1 and 3. Okay, so I'm going to pull, how am I going to do this?
And I have a disclosure on item 4.
I've made up my mind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 out of order, have the person come up and testify on 3. If you're testifying on 3, let's see, that would be Mr. George and Harvey Etter. Okay.
Good morning, respected board members. My name is Ranji George. I'm an ex-AQMD employee. I worked with battery technologies and hydrogen fuel cells, and towards the later part, I was a school bus program supervisor where we developed natural gas buses and implement them in a fairly large scale. My concerns on this item are twofold. One is general concerns and one specific concerns. The general concerns, and I'm a little disappointed that policymakers of ARB, CEC, and this agency have failed to recognize the huge issue of battery waste. We have been, all these great technology that's coming down the pipeline, we have one major tsunami that's about to start is what happens to the battery at the end of its life. And unfortunately, you have good intentions to help EJ communities, but these are where the waste plants going to be located, not in Bel Air or Beverly Hills or South Pasadena. So and at best we have some paper studies as of now with DOE, but I would urge you to put a lot more funding and make it a lot more transparent about the impacts of battery recycling right now and not merely rely on OEM. The second general concern, is the lack of relative support for hydrogen. In the Volkswagen settlement, which had hundreds of millions of dollars, hydrogen technologies were taken to the cleaners. And hydrogen will not have a battery waste problem, at least not at the gigantic scale that will happen. Unfortunately, ARB went ahead with the consent order, and it's really surprising. If you look at the metrics of all the funding that's been poured into zero emissions from last 10 years from ARB, CEC, and all that, hydrogen is getting far less funding. We should be keeping, for every $1 on battery, $1 for hydrogen to play at neutral ground. We need 200 hydrogen stations in this area. And when I was involved with hydrogen, there were 8, all manufacturers were involved in hydrogen, but as far as I recall, only 3 are left, Mirai, Honda, and Hyundai, and maybe one other. So this is embarrassing. Unless you have an influence on this, please bring hydrogen to the fore. And thirdly, and I'll wrap it up, is the specific concern on these projects. Let's not throw millions of dollars for highly profitable companies. When I was natural gas supervisor and for the school bus program, even though we limited our funding to $400,000 and encouraged various manufacturers to compete with us. We didn't take sides and we had some of the best technologies in the market. It's still running 10, 15 years old. You can do the same thing. So please put some money into battery recycling, hydrogen waste, and distribute these funds so that others can participate too.
Thank you for your comments.
For those who weren't here when Mr. George was here, he was an outstanding employee at this district for a long time, and I had the pleasure of being here when he retired. What does staff have to say about his comments?
Well, he raises a lot of good points. There's certainly items that we're well aware of. The recycling of the lithium ion. I mean, we know the challenge that we have with regards to battery recycling. There are very few facilities that actually do battery recycling. None, as far as I'm aware of, that do lithium ion are in the western United States, even if in the United States. Most of the facilities, and we had 2, Exide's no longer there, that did the lead acid battery recycling. What a lot of people are doing is looking at secondary uses for the automotive batteries, where they're now being repurposed for stationary use. And that will extend the lives. You don't need the depth of discharge for the recharging in a stationary application. So we find that the batteries are going longer, but I think that from a long-term perspective, what Mr. George said is correct. There should be more research being done on how ultimately you're going to recycle those, and it's something that we're certainly keeping track of. And then with regards to the issue on the VW settlement, in part that was driven by ARB. We are big advocates of hydrogen. We agree that there should be more funding for hydrogen. And I think that, there are trade-offs, certainly when you look at the recharging times for recharging a battery vehicle, electric battery vehicle, battery storage, versus a fuel cell vehicle. So we would like to see more funding on hydrogen, but I think that as a result of the VW settlement itself, it's one of those where this is where the funds are being directed, and we will implement that. And then Dr. Miyasato reminded me that we're also funding the Toyota Camry project. Kenworth, I'm sorry. And there was one other issue that Ranjit addressed. What was that?
Distributing the money at 400,000 to a lot of different players to bring.
Well, as Board Member Robinson mentioned, the only way that we get to scale is by working with large OEMs. And so I think this board has supported small companies in the past, but we haven't been able to see a commercialized product yet. So we're really looking at working with the large companies in order to get to scale. So that's why we're helping Toyota Kenworth on their Class 8 fuel cell truck, and we're looking for other opportunities to partner with large companies.
Supervisor Hahn?
Well, I really appreciate the remarks about the battery recycling. That is a huge problem. I know, look at the issues we're having with Exide. Quametco is the other facility that we're having big issues with. And it's usually, these are located in communities that are already experiencing environmental injustice in their community. So it's definitely something I think we have to look at long-term. I'm a big believer in electric vehicles, but this is a problem that I'm not sure we have properly figured out long-term, and I think we really need to.
I'm sorry, I skipped you, Supervisor Rutherford. You were supposed to be first.
I wanted to talk about two items, 14 and 22, combined together because I'm not sure where the comments are most appropriate.
Well, why don't, then I will call on you when we get to those. I'm going to ask for the items to be pulled.
That's fine, thank you.
As soon as we finish this. Now, other than Mr. Etter's testimony, we have no more testimony on the items that we have called for the vote. Are there any items that any board members would like to pull?
Yes. I have a disclosure on item 4.
Okay.
And I have a disclosure on item 4 also, and I wanted to make a comment on item 3 we just talked about.
Okay.
So on item 4, I don't have a financial interest, but I'm required to identify for the record that I serve on the Board of Supervisors for the County of Los Angeles, which is involved in this item.
Similarly, on item 4, I do not have a financial interest, but I am required to identify for the record, a little different. I'm a Deputy Attorney General of the State of California Department of Justice, which is one of the parties involved in this item.
All right. Now, you're saying that no one has any item that they want to pull? This may be a full. Janice? Which
I had
item?
3.
Well, the 14 and 22, you said you were going to pull them.
14 and 22. Okay. Just the consent calendar. 13. Do you have anything 1 through 13? Well, we can make it 1 through 26. How's that?
I just have number 3. I wanted a question or a comment
Sure.
on 2.
Okay, your question on 3?
Mr. Chair, yes, as you just testified. So this is a project to approve a contract for the, I guess, design, development, commercialization, I guess, of a 3 battery electric vehicles. I support it 100%, but what I'd like, we approve dozens of these projects every year, and they're great projects. But I'd like, on this one, we put some type of provision in where the company, once they develop this and are going to demonstrate it out there a lot, that they come back to a board meeting and do a demonstration here. We can see it. And as part of our outreach to the school districts and the community, we have so many community events. I'd like that vehicle, if we want it, a board member wants to use it at a community event, that we can say, yes, put that in a provision. They've got to provide so many during the year. We approve hundreds of millions of dollars. We have basically $700 million of our budget goes to these programs. The rest is for a general fund. And many times we don't get to see these. They're great projects. So I like to see every once in a while, maybe a couple come back as part of that contract, a demonstration here. So maybe at a meeting, we can all see that vehicle out front that we've supported in heavy duty, medium duty, refuse trucks, whatever it is. And they also are required to do their demonstrations at some of our events, especially the outreach to the schools. We're doing a lot of lawnmower stuff there. I saw the recent article about some of the light duty vehicles, but this would be nice for people to see. Can that be a part of a contract provision in some of these or no?
Well, I would ask that in order to do what you're saying through the contract, we'd have to go back to them. I think we'd have to negotiate. And I think they would certainly be happy to do so. And I think that we can ask them to do that and we can just do it. This item was actually more of an administrative correction.
I read it.
So I would just ask if we could proceed with that. And we will ask the contractor to come back and do the demonstrations. And I think that we can actually expand that so that we can maybe even have a year-end event where we're actually showing the progress on some of those.
Wayne, I'd like that. If it's in our future contracts, if you can put a provision in there, just a simple one.
Sure.
That they know that. And I know a lot of board members would go to events sometimes, and I'm going around to my different cities, and I always put it on a demonstration of an electric leaf blower. So I get a council member, like I was in South Amani the other night. So I pulled a council member up, the mayor with me, and I said, okay, as you had here, we did the demonstration. We sent 20 feet away and turned the electric leaf blower on. It blows papers, people's hair, and everything like that. But people love it. They never forget. And people in the audience, how can I get one of those? My commercial gardener. But this would be great if we can just put a provision, have them come back, and be available to the board members whenever they want them. Thank you. And I'll make a motion to approve item 3.
Second.
We have testimony on all these items, so we'll take them all at one time. Ms. Rutherford, you've been so patient. Thank you.
On items 14 and 22, these are our legislative public affairs reports. I notice in item 14, we have a list of all the legislators that our staff has been in touch with over the course of that time period. And note in item 22, we have an update on 732, which is our taxing authority district bill by Senator Allen. Yet Senator Allen does not appear on the list of legislators we've had any contact with. Those things seem incongruent.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
as chair of the legislative committee, I would like to address that, at least initially. There have been some changes since our legislative committee meeting and what is listed in our legislative committee agenda and minutes from that meeting. So I'd like to ask staff to give us an update on what has happened since the legislative committee meeting in the last week and a half or so. There's some new developments. So, Mr. Nastri.
Sure, and I apologize. I was looking for the dates on this to make sure because things have been moving very quickly. So as I recall, we met with the Legislative Committee on April 11th, and at that meeting, we had advised the committee that we had asked Senator Allen to pull the bill. That was the request that we had made. On April 20th, we were advised by Senator Allen through an email to me that he did not intend to pull it, and that in fact he wanted to move ahead with the bill in committee. This was somewhat of a surprise to us and necessitated a change in my schedule. The perspective or our thinking was at the time that if a senator advanced a bill where we were the sponsor and we weren't present, that it would be very difficult for us to have legislation done in the future where we had gone to an author and having them put that bill forward. So the decision was made to appear at the committee meeting, which was on April 22nd, 3rd? 24th. The 24th. So we actually went up to Sacramento on that Monday, which would have been the 22nd, I believe. Yeah, so we went up. We met, we did not meet with the author at the time, but we met with staff. And we had asked a lot of questions in terms of what was going forward and why was it going forward. We understand that there was outreach made by Mr. Denny Zane, and he had proposed some amendments. The amendments would have really changed the focus from the bill being strictly focused on a district authorization bill that was really focused on funding the air quality management plan to also including funding provisions for transit agencies, various transit lines and various transit projects. And we had a lot of concern. He also had a provision in there for an oversight group. So there was some parts that we thought were worthwhile, that were in line with the board's direction. At the time, we were not sure whether or not the bill would pass, and to be honest, we weren't even sure whether or not the author was going to actually present the bill in committee, because it really was in question. We were there ready at 9 a.m. for the committee meeting. We didn't get called up until a little after 4:30, I think it was. And even then, we weren't sure what was going to happen. But once the Senator Allen presented the bill, then we had to go in and defend our bill. There was a number of comments. Senator Bell, up from Northern California, had a lot of concerns about the transit and the transportation aspects and wanted to make sure that those issues were being addressed. There was a lot of concern about how this would move forward. There is opposition to the bill. One of the reasons why we had asked for the senator to pull the bill was to give us time to address that opposition. That opposition included concern expressed by cities, municipalities with regards to the sales tax cap. There was also concern expressed by trades and unions. So we wanted to be able to address a lot of these issues. The fact of the matter is, when we spoke about it at committee, Senator Hertzberg said, "This is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard, but I'm still going to move this bill." And what he had said was that the state really needed to review the whole way that it looks at taxing authorities. And so while he wasn't specifically opposed to what we were trying to do, he wants to do a comprehensive tax reform. But the bill still moved. The bill now will go to Senate Appropriations Committee. We're not clear at this point what the date on that would be. My understanding is that it would be, I want to say the 13th or the 20th. We know that as it moves forward that opposition is going to continue, so we're trying to address some of those concerns right now, and that's the latest status. I haven't had a chance to speak with the Senator's Chief of Staff and our consultants this week to find out where we are. But once we do, we'll advise, and we've been keeping the Legislative Committee apprised of all our efforts. And Derek can add to this.
Yes, Supervisor Rutherford, your question why he's not listed on our legislative report is because our consultants were the ones that were visiting him. This section right here is just about staff that has visited these offices, but our consultants up in Sacramento have been in contact with him constantly on this bill.
Well, as a member of the Legislative Committee, I'd like to know who our consultants are talking to as well. So if we could perhaps get a separate section of the report that explains all the communications that happen, that would be fabulous.
Sure.
I was in Sacramento that day as well. I know that was an absolutely crazy day in the building and that the bill was very delayed and I couldn't get there for the hearing at that time due to other commitments. I had asked at the last board meeting here that we seek, as sponsors of the bill, taxpayer oversight and protection language. The chairman asked that it be discussed in legislative committee. When I raised the issue at legislative committee, I was told we didn't need to have that discussion because the bill was being dropped and not moved any farther. Bill ends up getting moved farther. Someone from the outside suggests oversight. Did we get that amendment into the bill? Are we ever going to address the issue that I've raised, or are we just going to let someone else try to protect our taxpayers?
She's absolutely right, and I'm the guy who said the bill was dead because that's what I was told, so, you know, we need.
And I get it. I get that funky things happen up there, but I wasn't allowed to raise and discuss the issue because the bill was going to be killed, and I fear we're going to get behind the eight ball. I mean, we're being used on this legislation. We are being used and played. And it's bad enough that it's happening to us, but if it's going to happen to the taxpayers, no. So have we written the amendment? Have we taken the language that I brought to Leg Committee at the chairman's direction? And have we asked for the senator to amend that? Did we raise that at committee? Do we have a legislator pushing those amendments?
So we haven't brought it back to committee because we haven't had a committee meeting since then. The committee meeting that would have taken place next would have been next week, but that meeting was canceled.
Yeah.
But with
Which
regards,
is why I asked that we discuss it at the last committee meeting, even though we thought the bill might be pulled, because guess what? It wasn't. You'll excuse me for feeling like I'm not being heard and addressed on this issue, and it's the taxpayers who are going to suffer.
we do have language that we're ready to discuss
Why
with
don't you
the
just get
author.
it to the senator's office, and that would take care of her concern. That's all you have to do.
We will do that.
Okay, it's no big deal.
And then if we
But
could,
It is a big deal, but
It
it's
it
not
is a big deal. It's
to
it's a
do it.
solvable problem.
Right.
And then
Right.
if we could see the language that you end up with, that would be great too.
Well, if
Supervisor, we'll
take
get you
your
the language.
You've already seen it, right?
Pardon me for not trusting that that's the language that will end up in the bill.
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, get her a copy of the language, please.
Yes.
Okay, so now that's 14 and 22. Now we have Mr. Edder's testimony. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Bartlett.
Thank you. I had some comments on 14 and 22 to add to Supervisor Rutherford's comments. So the board's direction to staff to support the original SB 732 was taken before I joined the AQMD board. And with the recent course of events and the author declining to withdraw the bill, so I have some concerns. And I know that some members of the board here also raised some concerns on the dais and at the committee meetings as well. And then I've also heard loud and clear from some of the residents in Orange County relative to this bill. So as California residents, we already have the highest general sales tax rate in the nation. And the establishment of sales and use taxes are intentionally limited to counties, cities, and transportation agencies. And as was stated before, there's currently what we feel is no taxpayer oversight with included in the bill language itself. And there's no guarantee that the revenue generated from the tax would actually reduce emissions or even come back to the AQMD. So the largest question is concerns about the voter threshold necessary depending on how this proceeds through the legislature. And I think the concerns are real given the current direction of the bill where it's moving. It's sort of morphed into something else than what the original intent was. And I think we really need to carefully consider our next steps. And if it continues along the same path, consider whether we should actually continue to be a sponsor as well. Thank you.
Supervisor Perez is next, but in keeping with that, this is the first time I'm hearing about the push by to include other items in the bill. I'm a little concerned about not a little concerned, I am concerned about this myself. Supervisor?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the privilege, and members. You know, wacky things do happen up in Sacramento, right? In the spirit of the LA Rams, sometimes bills get intercepted.
Right.
And these things do happen. Sometimes bills get taken hostage. At the end of the day, even though we're sponsors, the author is the author. And they have that privilege to decide to move a bill forward or not, even if it was our idea to bring it forward. Although I definitely understand the frustration and appreciate Supervisor Rutherford's point, because I thought that was a good point, that we should amend the bill or the idea and include a commission or an oversight committee. It didn't get done because we thought it was going to get pulled or we were going to pull it. It is what it is, but I do think that we need to take a step back and analyze if we want to move forward or not. Because this bill now not only is getting intercepted, but it seems to me like it's also being kidnapped. And so we got to think about the cost benefits. Do we want to align ourselves with others in the sense of transportation efforts? Do we want to take on the opposition? So it's all right, you know, it is what it is. These things happen all the time up in Sacramento. It's nothing new. But if we do decide to move forward, we definitely need to make sure we have the language there that has been brought up already many times. I think that's important. We can also decide to remove our support and take a step back altogether and decide to do it next year. That's okay too, right? So, you know, this is a process, and quite frankly, what we're trying to do here, if we decide to ensure eventually there'll be some sort of fee or a tax so that we can deal with air pollution, it's gonna take us maybe a year or two to get there. It's okay, we'll get there.
I love listening to you. Dwight?
Those are my points.
Yeah, hey, man, I'm gonna make a comment on your comments, Mr. Robinson.
With the comments that have been made already, I'll just say ditto. But beyond that, last year, we had a similar issue. We were talking about some legislation, last-minute issues and things of that nature. And I made just a comment, somewhat of a suggestion. It was easy for me to make since I'm not on the legislative committee, but what I suggested was that it might make sense for us to have more frequent meetings at this time of year when legislation's moving, and then try to cancel the meetings toward the end of the year when legislation is essentially irrelevant. And again, I'm always happy to serve on the legislative committee if you ever need someone to join. No problem there. But again, that was just my suggestion.
that's an
If I heard
excellent
correctly, we're canceling our next one. Is that right?
I see the chair of the legislative committee has her little pencil out.
Yeah.
making notes.
So, you know,
So it's
it's,
another good suggestion.
we recognize things move very rapidly, things change quickly, and the fact that we're just meeting, you know, potentially once a month, maybe even less frequently, I think at this time of year, it probably makes sense to try to do that more. I know we all have incredibly busy schedules, so, but I think that it's incredibly valuable as
Right.
well, because we're
But
having
with
this long
the
discussion.
Technology, we can put it all together.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea. Mr. Caccioti?
Mr. Chair, just in the last several months, I've been visiting all my cities, as I do every couple of years, and it started with my city with kind of a pushback on this item. I don't know, Ben, in your city council, I started noticing, as I brought up, you know, issues about, you know, supporting AQMD and air quality and things like that. It was kind of brought up in a direct way about, well, we're not sure what they're going to do with taxes and things. And then as I started visiting my cities, I sit after I make a presentation and listen. Almost every city, the dozen or so I visited, and at the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, there's an effort to increase our sales tax before AQMD gets out there. We're going to increase our sales tax before AQMD. I sit there every meeting and just watch as we get punched. As I sit there after my presentation, and even one of the council members walk by, you're just a taxer, you guys at AQMD. We're just looking at the authorization for a district. But it's incredible the pushback we're getting, and even some of my cities at the COG, who I have a great relationship with, they're amassing as a group to fight us. And I just reading the papers, Wayne had a great article a few weeks ago about air quality, right before the Lung Association came out. But I'm looking at my former city manager in Azusa, and they're putting in, we've got to get our sales tax on the ballot before AQMD gets out there. Everybody's bringing it up at all the cities I go to. We're just the punching bag to get theirs up to as a supervisor to the limit before we do. So it's, yeah.
I think that all the comments I've heard about this are accurate. I, as chairman of the complaint department, I get them from both sides and underneath and on top. And some of this opposition is coming from some really strange places that have other concerns with this board and are trying to use this as a pressure point to manipulate us. So, you know, I think you're right. I think it's become, when Wayne first came to me and said, man, we can cure smog in South Coast if we do this, that was like, hey, what more could we want, you know? But it's not ending up like that. It's not ending up like that. But what some of these people, you know, and trust me, I understand how cities want to get in front of us. I mean, let me speak from a non-AQMD perspective. Let me speak from Bill Burke, the taxpayer. I'm married to a former legislator, and I have a child who is a legislator. And I'm an anti-tax guy. So it's very hard for me to go to Thanksgiving dinner. Because, you know, in Sacramento, they have this enormous rainy day fund. So as I was chiding my youngest child the other day, was nobody from Sacramento called me and asked me if I had a rainy day fund. They don't care. Why does government need a rainy day fund? Why do they need to accumulate my money so they can have this money to spend? Well, that just happens to be my pet peeve. I think we need to ask the legislative committee chair to take a look at this with her committee and get back to the board ASAP with where we are and what we're doing, because it's like Manny says, we've been captured and intercepted. So, you know, and I couldn't understand Supervisor Rutherford the other day, you know, because she was concerned, and the bill was dead. So, and she said, well, you know, I told her she should be doing her happy dance, you know, but I understand now. I'm not so old that I can't learn, but will you do that for us?
I'll be happy to do that. I mean, the end of last week was sort of a wake-up call for what's happening with this bill. And like Councilmember Caccioti mentioned, we're getting a lot of opposition from cities and the other taxing agencies who are concerned about us putting a measure on the ballot that then rubs up against theirs. Even though ours is could be exempt from the cap, there's still this concern about voter exhaustion over, you know, sales tax increases. And once we put another measure on, you know, it's going to be either on top or just underneath some cities or counties' sales tax, and then create a problem in that jurisdiction. So I think we will come back and take another look at this. I'll ask for the committee to meet, you know, maybe on a special meeting of this committee to discuss what has happened just in the last week, and see what direction we want to go with this. Supervisor Rutherford put it very succinctly when she said, "Are we getting kidnapped with this bill?" Because, and you know, people who have worked in the legislature understand that sometimes that happens. Somebody else comes in and starts maneuvering your bill. So it's something we need to take a look at. I mean, we went down this path because our AQMP requires us to find a source of monies, $1 billion a year, to meet the requirements of the AQMP. Right. Now, how are we going to do that? That has always been the question. This was one avenue that we settled on, but this may not be the right avenue. We may need to rethink where we're going to go with this.
Mr. Chair, if I may, somebody in front of me. Okay, I'm sorry.
McKellen's been waiting for.
All right.
Mayor McKellen, sorry. That's why I got the big guys, right?
I know, right?
You know, he blocks out the sun, man. When it comes out in the east, don't expect to be in the sunshine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I've opposed this bill from the beginning, but really now that Move LA and Denny Zane has kidnapped the bill, His agenda is different from ours, and I don't think we should associate ourselves with it. If the board chooses to move forward with this kind of taxing authority, then we ought to back off and consider doing something in the future rather than tying it to this bill.
You're ahead of your time on this one, man. Supervisor Hahn?
Yes, I was going to say, before the legislative committee meets and talks about that, is it possible for us to have a very clear description of what got added? So that even for ourselves, as we talk to our friends, we can just at least express our concerns, particularly about the transportation. Could you just let each of us know separately how the bill changed and to what degree when it came out of committee?
There were no formal changes.
Oh, so
when
the
bill-
transportation didn't, so it's still the same? Okay, so I didn't
No,
understand that.
No, it's not the same as I understand it. The
Well-
transportation thing, I didn't know anything about.
Ms. Delgado's reading it.
No.
I'm reading the bill text right now, and there's the
I
only
yield my time
additions.
to the new lady from,
Yeah, sorry, I can't press my button. So the only changes were regarding the GIS mapping system that would be implemented to determine the district. What I think was being told to us is that there was an attempt to make these additions, but it
Oh.
moved forward for
Without
discussion
it.
purposes.
Okay,
And I think it's appropriate to debrief with the committee, because there are a lot of factors here, and the I'm sorry, I will learn everybody's name, but the gentleman who talked about Sacramento politics is absolutely accurate. I'd be happy to help how I can, given I just served with these folks, so.
these wacky
That's
folks.
former Assemblyman Manny
Yes,
Perez.
yes, I
Right.
know, I know
I'm sorry,
that.
Manuel
Yes.
Perez.
Thank you. Oh, so what we were concerned about it being, the revenue being shared with transportation projects did not attach itself to the bill?
No, those are, the direction from the committee was to work amongst the stakeholders to try to address those concerns. So the issue of whether or not the bill has been hijacked, I think is a little premature. I think
Yeah.
it is on the verge of that.
We got all nervous about
And
nothing?
we need to do exactly what has been said, which is understand where are things headed right now. And we will bring back in a second if we believe that the bill does not fulfill our intentions.
And we should be reaching out to Senator Allen and letting him know that.
We are
Right.
working with his
Okay,
staff
so it's not
to
as
do
bad
that.
as it seemed 5 minutes ago. I mean, I agree that the oversight piece, I don't think any of us disagree with that being a part of this. But it doesn't seem as bad as what we were all kind of worried about.
Well, we're at
we
the
don't
point
know.
where we have
We don't
amendments
know.
that
We don't know.
we would share
We
with
need
But
the
it did, but it
committee.
Get
got
back
out
to
of
us.
committee without
Yeah.
those amendments that we were just talking about.
With the direction to work with everybody to try to address those concerns. And so whether that's done on the floor, whether that's done in approps, we're still trying to address that.
As
Which
important
means
as-
they have to work with us
Oh, yes,
on those concerns.
yes.
Okay.
As
Not as bad
important
as
as
it
this is, we may want to consider having a legislative committee of the whole to look at this. And that being the whole board, being the legislative committee at that point, or a special meeting of the board when these briefings come up, Mr. Lawyer?
That would be a special meeting of the governing board, Mr. Chair.
Right, okay. Because, then everybody gets to weigh in and express their concerns, okay? Because when you say we're on the verge of being hijacked, verge is I don't know if I'm on this edge, or I'm up here, I'm over here, or I'm down here, So I spoke to former Speaker Willie Brown yesterday or day before, and he said I was gone. So, I'm sure various people will have various different opinions about this. So we need to find out. And I will be glad to call a special meeting of the board when the next information comes in, whatever that is. 'Cause
Is
we
it
can do
something
we can do it by telephone.
Or is it something we can add to next week's retreat agenda?
Oh, yeah, sure, that's great. No problem.
We actually have an update on the agenda for next week. I know that we're not going to have all of the board members present. And what I can do in the meantime is what was suggested is we've just finished working on some proposed language changes, which I haven't even read yet, but I got last night. I'll review those. We'll get those out to the board members in entirety. I think we can do that, right? Just as an update. And then I will continue to work through the Ledge Committee on these issues, and we'll provide that update next week. Hopefully, we'll have a better idea of whether or not it's going to go on the 13th or on the 20th, and we'll have direction at that point.
All right. As we continue to move on the consent calendar. Yeah, Mr. Eder, would you come to the microphone? Bay, would you-
3 minutes for items 1 through 26, Mr. Chair.
3 minutes, items 1 through 26. Okay. You heard him, Mr. Eder?
Yes, Dr. Burke. I thought on the back, on the back of this, it says, under public comments, well, I don't know about I don't see it here. I saw it somewhere else. Oh. Anyway, it says 3 minutes for public comment, 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes for, for each item, and 3 minutes for public hearings. This has to be, the public's been getting our time shut down and brought down. I've got important things to say, and, other folks aren't. In reference to what you're talking about, Move LA. I've known Denny for about 10, 20 years, but not well. He was in Santa Monica. And we put in a proposal as part of immediate total solar conversion with environmental justice, solar equity. And again, this is a copy of the study that we did for the PUC almost 40 years ago, the Low-Income Solar Equity Program. And this was an assessment of all state, local, and federal programs and how to complement them and leverage them to get equity. Example was given also with that you got the low-income credits were refundable, and the example given was if you get up to $3,000 on each system for hot water, space heating, electrics, $9,000. State writes a check, and you could put money down on a house and buy a house and have a place to put the system. All right, and also get into healthcare and whatnot. The big picture is that we talked about this also at administrative committee meetings, and I want to incorporate the administrative meetings on the February 8th of 2019, 10 a.m. It's about 51 minutes, from 19 to 29 minutes is me and Dr. Burke. Got some support from Dr. Burke, and then Wayne came in near the end. And also the last 3 minutes, but they basically conceded that solar is cost-effective. And under BARC, that's state law, the best available retrofit control technology, and it's a unanimous decision of the state Supreme Court in 2012. And that's what's in that exchange there. They admitted that solar is cost-effective for anything else. The only thing that was contested, they said, was heaters in a refinery. That's part of reclaim. That's obviously out, either directly if there isn't land district heating systems and for electric. And so they said, he said, well, this isn't cost effective. I said, and Dr. Burke said, oh, well, you got to deal with it. Anyway, I said, where's your information? I said, we submitted 40, 50 exhibits in the 16 plan, and we just got that a week ago and have it on thumb drive, but it is not organized in any sequential number. It's everything from 17 and 18. And the BARC should be, as this, all programs that finance for solar renewable should include low-income solar equity and middle income, and that they actually own these and get the tax credits and the write-offs or structure it so there's a market for it, and anyway, I think it's extremely important. There's a retirement fund for low income, and it could be used for that, put by De Leon. And this should be advanced into other areas. We got to quantify health costs at $9 million per premature death, and the state only missed $7,500, and the district $4,400.
Thank you for
anyway,
comments, Mr. Eder.
that's $70 billion a year. That in 30 years, that's $1.5 trillion.
Thank you.
And they didn't include other issues.
That concludes our testimony on the consent calendar. May I have a motion on the consent
I'll
calendar?
move the items, Mr. Chair.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to the consent calendar? Hearing none, the consent calendar is approved unanimously. On that motion, was that item 1 through 26 your motion?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay, item 27.
Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the board. My name is Sarah Reese. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning here at the district. And today I'm going to give you an informational briefing on the status of ozone levels in the Coachella Valley, as well as a request we'll have coming for your consideration in the June board meeting to reclassify the Coachella Valley for its non-attainment status for the 1997 8-hour ozone standard. So a quick summary of the issue. Currently, the Coachella Valley is a severe non-attainment area for the 8-hour ozone standard. The attainment date is June 15th of 2019, which is just around the corner. Based on the current recent monitoring data, we know that this area is not going to attain the standard by that date. So we had the last 2 years in Coachella Valley, levels were coming down. Over the last 2 years, they ticked up a bit, and so that's going to cause us to not be able to meet the attainment date. Under the Clean Air Act, when that happens, local air agencies are allowed to ask EPA to reclassify an area to the next highest level of non-attainment. So this would be a request to reclassify the area from severe to extreme. Doing so provides us additional time to get the area into attainment, so the next attainment date would be in 2024, and we believe that by that time the area will be able to reach attainment. So this just gives you an overview of what the different air basins look like. We have, our South Coast Air Basin. Coachella Valley is next to us, and what's happening is pollutants from the South Coast Air Basin are being transported to Coachella Valley. So it's both ozone that's being generated in our basin, as well as precursor emissions, the NOx and VOCs. They're being transported over to Coachella, and that's what's causing the ozone levels over there. You can see that this uptick that I mentioned, it wasn't unique to Coachella Valley. We also saw it in some other air basins in California for the last 2 years. And in fact, in general, in the western U.S., we saw some uptick as well. So that indicates there's probably a bit more of a regional issue going on. We believe, over the last 2 years, we had some periods of very hot weather, some stagnant air conditions during that time. That was happening more regionally, and so that's why we were seeing these increasing levels of ozone. So this is what design values look like for the Coachella Valley over the last many years. You can see for the 1979 1-hour ozone standard, we actually attained that in Coachella, and we've attained that for several years at this point. And you can see then also for the 1997, the 8-hour standard, levels were on track to hit attainment. They were declining nicely, so our strategies were working. But then you see the uptick I mentioned in 2017 and 2018. So in terms of other pollutants, Coachella Valley does attain the PM 2.5 standard, both for the 24-hour standard and then the annual standard. So that is a piece of good news. Story's not quite the same for the PM10 standard. We measure PM10 in Indio and Palm Springs and Mecca in the Coachella Valley. Levels in Indio and Palm Springs are lower than the standard, so by that measurement we would attain, but we are seeing some high levels in Mecca during high wind events. So that's when dust gets blown around and you'll see some additional levels. So we're still evaluating the data in Mecca, and when we reach a point where we feel that we're able to demonstrate attainment, we'll be seeking a reclassification for that area with EPA. This just shows you overall trends, both from our emission inventory and then measured NO2 trends or concentrations in the area. And so we can see here, again, the trends are going down. So it's a good story. It shows that our strategies are working, emissions are going down, and we're seeing from our emission inventory, but we're also seeing that reflected by the concentrations in the atmosphere. So in terms of impacts of what this reclassification would do, I mentioned it would give us the additional 5 years, so our new attainment date would then be in June of 2024. So the threshold by which you would classify major stationary sources, right now under a severe area, that's 25 tons per year, that would drop down to 10 tons per year. So more sources would be classified as major sources. Under this reclassification, we would avoid having a non-attainment fee imposed on major sources. And then also we would have a requirement to revise the plan to demonstrate attainments eventually with the standard, and that would be due 12 months after EPA approves our request. If we don't take this action, EPA would take steps to issue a finding of failure to attain the standard, and they would start that right after the June 15th deadline. That would have similar consequences for the Coachella Valley. The only difference is that there would be the imposition of this non-attainment fee for major stationary sources. So the number of additional facilities that we think would be major sources is under the severe classification and the extreme classification. Currently, there are 3 major stationary sources in the Coachella Valley. That could go up by an additional 5 with an extreme classification. We're still evaluating what the potential to emit levels are of those stationary sources. We think it's probably going to be less than 5 that are impacted, but just gives you an idea of what the potential scope could be. In terms of what those impacts would be for the folks that are already classified as major stationary sources, there wouldn't be any additional impacts for them. If the entities that would now be classified as major stationary sources, they would have Title V and new source review potential impacts. So I mentioned there could be up to 5 facilities that now are classified as major stationary sources. These are entities that have emergency backup generators, so hospitals, some government entities. Transportation category I mentioned here is the Palm Springs Aerial Tramway. It has a backup generator. But the actual emissions of these entities are really low. So we think they have options in the event that their potential to emit is such that they would trigger the major stationary source threshold. They could take a cap that keeps them below that. So we think that there are some options for those entities such that the impacts will be pretty minimal. In terms of public process, in April we released our draft staff report for public comment on this issue. We just finished up public consultation meetings in the Coachella Valley on Wednesday. We had a meeting in the afternoon in Palm Desert and then a meeting in the evening in Coachella. Right now I'm briefing you on the issue, and then in June we'll be bringing this before you for your consideration with then a submittal to CARB and EPA immediately after. So again, our recommendation that we'll be discussing with you in June is that we request EPA to reclassify the area from severe to extreme non-attainment. And again, this gives us the time we need to be able to have our plans take effect to attain the standard, and has relatively minor consequences. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms.
Ask about the tramway.
Well, there may be a seat for the board available. It's a fun place.
I was just there a few weeks ago. Beautiful.
It's a nice place, fun place. Mr. Chair, thank you. And staff, I want to say thank you as well for going out to the Coachella Valley. I had the opportunity to visit with you in Palm Desert alongside Mr. Benoit. Came visit us as well. Obviously, Mr. Benoit was raised out in the area. And appreciate the fact that you came out to the community. I think it's very important to demonstrate the fact that you're being accessible and the fact that you're willing to hear from the community. I really appreciate the fact that not only that you come during the day to the city of Palm Desert, but that you actually came in the evening in the city of Coachella. Where, quite frankly, it's an underserved area. I'm sure you saw the difference between Palm Desert and Coachella. And the fact is that many times it's Coachella, the working class community, that sometimes does not have a voice or is not asked to be engaged or be part of this type of conversation. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you, a big thank you for being out there. And obviously, you know, we got to continue to go out there and educate people about what's happening. And there are some concerns, right? As you notice as well, as you continue to move towards the eastern Coachella Valley, there's a lack of infrastructure. There's a lack of jobs. There's a hope that into the future we're able to build out affordable housing in that area, that we maybe are able to bring eventually light manufacturing, if that's at all possible, some retail, commercial, and so perhaps even a hospital, because the growth is moving in that direction. And so I guess for me, one of the concerns, and I know it was brought up at perhaps one or both of the meetings, is the future of economic development, how this could potentially impact the future of economic development in a negative way. Right? And so I just want us to be mindful and be thoughtful as to how we can move forward with this effort without stymieing or without making it so that people that potentially want to invest or potentially want to build economically in that region, especially the eastern Coachella Valley, like Mecca, Thermal, Oasis, North Shore, the unincorporated areas, we have to be thoughtful in that way with the business community. For me, that's very, very, very important. So that's one piece that I want us to really think about. Another concern I think that's important is knowing that, knowing that a lot of the reason why we're here at this point is because of what's happening out here in the LA area and what's happening at the South Coast Air Basin, and obviously coming down to the Coachella Valley. I think that we have to look at mitigation efforts and think about how we all share the cost, and it can't just be one area, especially knowing that the reason why we're not reaching attainment has nothing to do with, other than maybe the weather. It's pretty hot down there.
Right.
And there is dust, there is PM10, I get that. But the emissions are not as bad down there as they are up here. So what's that balance? And I want to make sure we strike that balance. I want to make sure that we're fair. And I want to make sure that we're equitable moving forward. And so I want us to think about that as well. And my last piece is, we say that we would be able to reach attainment by 2024. How certain are we about that? We're moving in the right direction, and I know we were doing everything we could to get there. But obviously, these last couple of years impacted us in a negative way, and we weren't able to. So, by 2024, what are the strategies to ensure that we actually will reach attainment? Because obviously, at the end of the day, no one wants to pay extra fees, and as well stop any type of funding that can come from the federal government, especially transportation dollars or anything else, because we don't reach attainment. So I just want to put out those 3 points to all of you. I'm open about your suggestions, your thoughts, and I welcome you to come back to the Coachella Valley, and I welcome you to, let's go further east. Let's have the next meeting maybe in Mecca. Right, let's go have our meeting maybe near the Salton Sea.
You mean Mecca, California?
Yeah, Mecca, California.
Hey, man,
Mecca, California.
Yes.
But I want to just make sure I put that out there because I think it's important that we also hit other communities to demonstrate our will to interact with a diverse group of folks that live out there in the area. So thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Chair, for this opportunity.
I've been here over a quarter century. We've never had a remote board meeting out that way. Never.
Let's have one.
I'm for it. I'm for it. Okay.
I would appreciate that.
Okay. We'll get you a jet to fly you out there. Okay, that was a receive and file, correct? Okay, item
Mr. Chair.
28.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Looking at the data, I think that Coachella will achieve the 8-hour ozone standard. It appears that it's going in the right direction. My concern is with the South Coast Air Basin. If you look at the data there, at the 3-year average number for attainment of 8-hour ozone, it continues to rise. My data shows that went from 55 days to 64 and then to 68. So I have a similar question. What's going to happen when we are not going to meet our 8-hour ozone standard in 2024? It's clear to me that we're not going to do that. So what's going to happen, and what can we do about it?
Well, we're actually going to have this on our agenda for the discussion next week at the board retreat, and we can talk about that a little bit more in depth at this point. We obviously share those concerns. I mean, that's in part why we have the AQMP, and the AQMP was trying to devise a way forward. We know we need to get those NOx reductions. We know we're behind the curve on some of those reductions because of the funding aspect, but there are a number of factors at play, and I would request that we have this discussion at the board retreat. But if there's some initial, perhaps, things that we can share, Dr. Fine can go into a little bit of that.
Even if we got the funding to incentivize the truck fleet to go to cleaner engines, that's not going to happen by 2024. So the funding is not really the issue. It overall is a bigger issue, but you know, I just don't see how we're going to make it at all.
Thank you, Mayor McAllen. This is Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules. It's an excellent point, and it obviously is a big challenge, and we are behind the curve. We've gone several years without raising the amount of funding that we had laid out in the AQMP. We actually are going to talk about this next week, but we actually have an even earlier deadline than 2024. By the end of this year, we're supposed to submit to EPA an update to our state implementation plan that talks about how much of that reductions we have, how far we have come, like where are we on that curve, but also trying to fill in the gaps that the AQMP had in terms of being more specific about how those reductions will occur over the next 3 years. So it's not just waiting till 2024 where we may or may not attain the standard. Again, very challenging to attain the standard, but it's going to actually happen towards the end of this year, where we're going to have an in-depth discussion of what we need to submit to EPA per the Clean Air Act to show what we're going to be doing in those next 3 years.
But you would agree with me that it doesn't appear like we're going to attain that standard by 2024.
I'm going to keep saying the word very challenging.
That's a cop-out. Thank you.
Right, that is a cop-out. 243. Okay, item 28.
So good morning, Dr. Burke and members of the board. Sujata Jain, Assistant DO of Finance. And this is a presentation of our goals and priority objectives, proposed budget, general fund budget, and proposed amendments to Regulation 3 fees for fiscal year 1920. And so most of this stuff we did discuss at our governing board budget workshop that was held on April 12th. So I'll just briefly touch upon some of this stuff again today over here. Our goals and priority objectives, it starts with our mission statement. We have 3 goals and 20 priority objectives. And these were discussed, the priority objectives were discussed at the budget workshop, and suggestions made by the board have been incorporated in our budget now. And there's one especially that was talked about was the high school outreach, and so we've incorporated that now. This is a summary of our general fund proposed budget for 1920, and in this slide there is a comparison of what our budget was in 1819, and we are comparing it to 1920. So you can see that our budget for 18-19 adopted budget was a balanced budget at $162.6 million. And our 19-20 budget is also a balanced budget at $170.9 million. There were amendments made throughout the year, and these were all board approved. And we estimate that we will end the fiscal year by using $5 million of our reserves. We have projected in the 19-20 budget increase in fees by CPI, which is 3.5%. And we are phasing in the last year of Title V fee increase, which the board approved 2 years ago, and that's 10.66%. So, and also we are going to be getting more in grant revenue for AB 617. So that's all been projected on the revenue side, which is up by about $8.3 million. And similarly, on the expenditure side, we have increases because we have increased FTEs for these grant positions, and these were mostly added during the mid-year adjustment. And I'll talk about staffing in the next slide. And also, our increases in the expenditures you will see is because of an increase in retirement costs and also salary increases that the board approved for a 3-year labor negotiation. So in the next slide, as I mentioned, this is staffing changes. It's a very busy slide, so I'll just summarize it. We are adding a net of 1 position in the fiscal year 19-20 budget. And basically, there's 2 additions in the Legislative and Public Affairs Division for a program supervisor and an admin secretary. And we are deleting the Chief Administrative Officer position. We are also deleting 3 ADO positions in Finance, AHR, and IM, and increasing 3 DO positions in the same divisions. We are also deleting 2 principal office assistants and adding 2 supervising office assistants. And we are changing the title of our health effects officer to be Director of Community Air Program / Health Effects Officer. And lastly, we are increasing the salary of the Chief Operating Officer by $12,816. The net add of all these changes to salaries is about $55,000. So the next 2 slides are just showing some efficiencies that AQMD has, and this slide is basically comparing the 19-20 expenditures to 29 years ago to the 91-92 budget. At that time, our budget used to be a $113 million budget, and now it's a $170.9 million budget. So it has increased by 51%. But when you adjust it for inflation, it's down by 12%. So we operate efficiently. And this next slide is also similarly showing where our expenditures are concentrated. And we spend about 64% of our expenditures for core activities such as compliance, monitoring, and permitting. And another 23% we spend on advanced technology programs and rulemaking. We spend about 13% on operations and customer service and policy. And so this last slide on the budget is showing our 5-year projection. And I just want to once again touch upon some brief things related to this. We are projecting our FTEs to be 939 going forward from 19-20. And in the 18-19 budget, they were, when it was adopted, they were at about 874 positions. So there is an increase in the FTEs, and that's mainly because of grant money coming in. Also, we have projected out in these 5 years CPI increase of approximately 3.5% on our stationary source fees. And as I mentioned, the last year of Title V fees have been phased into the 19-20 budget. And retirement cost increases that we are notified by SB Sarah have been projected out. And salary increases that the board approved have been projected also. What is not projected in this budget is there's going to be a discussion on toxics fees. That is not included in this budget, and neither is it projected out. And because we don't do that until, the board would actually take action on that. And what has been projected out is the ongoing AB 617 grant revenue that we expect to get. And there is some concern the board members have brought up in the past is that sometimes, and also just to touch upon the reserves, the governing board's policy is to keep the reserves at 20% or above. And in the first 3 years, we do show that the reserves are at 20% or above 20%, and it does go down below that after in the 2 years. But we have demonstrated that we manage that, and the way we did that is we looked back historically. So we basically looked at when 18-19 was the 5th year, what did we project and how are we going to end this year? So we projected that we would be at about 22-23% 5 years ago, and we estimate that we will end at 30%. So, you know, just to give some perspective, because that is a concern that sometimes board expresses. And also, you will see that sometimes we have a little bit of a structural imbalance, and that's mainly because there are some expensive infrastructure costs that have been pushed into the future. And what we suggest is that, you know, maybe take some of the reserves and put them in our infrastructure fund for some major building costs that are coming up. And because this is an aging building, and, you know, we are seeing that we need to replace our elevators, and so, which is going to cost about $2 million. And so things like that are going to be coming up, and so we would like to put some money away for that. And that concludes my budget presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions before I move it to Dr. Fine to do the second half of this presentation.
Supervisor Hahn?
Well, my questions were about the toxic fees. So did you say it wasn't a part of the budget? Or it's not a part of your?
We haven't projected any of the toxic fees that we are going to be talking about in this budget or in the 5-year projection.
But it's in this budget that we're raising fees and phasing them in. Is that part of this budget?
The presentation is going to be done by Dr. Fine. He's going to talk about that.
Oh, okay. Then
Yes.
I'll
Yeah, he's
reserve my
next up.
remarks.
No problem. You know, here's part of the problem that we're facing. We went through a lot of lean years. When I came here, the reserve was $3 million, which was 0.5%. And we got it up to over 20%. But part of that was we cut back on personnel slots, and we didn't fill people slots. The other part was we deferred maintenance. So you got to pay the price at some time for both. Now, quite frankly, I think that we're doing okay on the personnel thing. I think we've added personnel at an adequate rate so that we can keep the job going, but the building is a mess. It was like they were putting Band-Aids on the elevators in there. Every other week I would come in here and one elevator would be down, and the next week the other elevator would be down. And it just consists, so now we're replacing those elevators. I had no clue the elevators were that expensive, but they were. But you can't have a three or four story building and have everybody. Maybe we could work that out with our health insurance people, that if we make the people take the stairs, it might improve our health quality. But now we're facing, I've been told that we're facing a problem with the air coolers on the roofs. So those go, you can kiss air conditioning goodbye and heating goodbye, you know. So we're obviously going to have to replace those. But I would urge my colleagues to kind of take a look at the whole picture because, you know, it's like fixing up your house. You know, you could spend all your money fixing up your house, or you could fix it up a little bit at a time. And I think as we approach the repairs on this building, we need to consider doing a little bit at a time and until we get it back to where it needs to be. But there's no question that the building does need significant repair. Dr. Fine, you want to come? Yeah. Oh, is there any more questions for Sunjata? Okay. Okay. Phil,
Thank you.
they're saving all their bullets for you.
That's why I'm here.
I'm going to go to the bathroom because I can't stand the sight of blood.
All right, so again, Philip Fine, Deputy Executive Officer, Planning and Rules Division at AQMD. As we do almost every year with the budget, we bring forward our amendments to our Regulation 3, which includes all of our rules that impose fees on regulated facilities. And so we have several changes this year, one of which is a pretty major change. So first, we are following through with our CPI-based fee increase across the board. So that's reflected in the proposal to you today. We have about 5 proposals with new fees or fee increases. There's 4 minor fee adjustments. There's 1 large restructuring that I'll talk about in a moment in the next slides. There's 6 changes that are proposals for either fee reduction or relief. And then there's 4 proposals that are more administrative cleanup with no real fee impact, adding clarity. And then there's 1 additional proposal to Rule 209 outside of Reg 3 for a clarification on when there's a change of ownership or operator. But by far the biggest issue is this restructuring of the toxic fees. So there's 2 key issues that we're trying to address with this proposal. So first is that there's significant recent and anticipated upcoming district workload when it comes to toxic emissions and addressing toxic emissions from stationary sources. This is because of a lot of the work we did in Paramount and Compton and the hexavalent chromium and the toxic metals initiative and all the rules that we're working on to address all those issues. Some issues that have come up with fugitive hydrocarbons from oil and gas industry and refineries. There has been new state health risk assessment guidance that has increased the estimated risk that requires more scrutiny, as well as the AB 617 program, which obviously is a very big change in how we deal with these local air quality impacts. So recent and anticipated work. Second, when we looked at the structure of the toxic fees as they exist today, it doesn't correlate as well with what we are doing today and what we anticipate doing tomorrow in terms of where the revenue is going and where the expenditures are. So we do most of our work when it comes to the most toxic emissions, and we do most of our work where it comes to the complexity of emission sources at a particular facility. So what we're proposing today is a restructuring that more closely aligns to how those expenditures occur. When we look at what we collect from toxic emission fees today, we collect about $500,000. For criteria pollutants, we collect about $20 million. What we did is we looked at all the district activities that are supportable by toxic emission fees, and that actually adds up to about $20 million. And the chart on the right shows the types of activities that are eligible to be supported by these toxic emission fees. So obviously 500,000 is a lot less than that total amount. So what we're proposing is to restructure it. So it's a 3-tiered fee structure. The first fee is just a base toxics fee for any facility that is reporting to our system. It's a nominal fee of $78 once fully implemented. It raises about $100,000 a year to help just maintain that system to collect that data, the software and the support of that software. The second fee is a flat rate device fee. So it's about $342 per permitted device that has toxic emissions, and this is intended to reflect the work of auditing and looking at all those emissions coming in and making sure they're accurate, and because the inventory workload is highly correlated to the number of devices, the complexity of an individual facility. So that raises about $1.4 million per year once fully implemented for those activities. And then the final is a cancer potency-weighted fee that gets at the issue of the higher toxicity facilities that leads into enforcement efforts, rulemaking efforts, source testing efforts, monitoring efforts. And this we're proposing a $10 per cancer potency-weighted pound of toxic emissions. We're also proposing to add diesel PM as a reported toxic that has fees, which is currently not the case. We're not changing fees for ammonia or some of the ozone depleters. This would raise about $3.4 million once it's fully implemented to cover those activities outside of that toxics reporting group. These are the estimates of the revenue based on today's data. Obviously, it can change going forward as people start to look at their emissions reporting and maybe refine some of those estimates going forward now that these fees may be increased. So our proposed schedule for phasing this in, by statute, we have to phase such increases in over 2 years, but instead, we're proposing to phase it in over 3 years. It would increase the emissions-free revenue by about 22%. So when you add up criteria and toxics emission fees, this would be an increase of 22% overall. We're proposing phasing it, as I said, over 3 years, and we're proposing no increase in the first year. This is for a couple reasons. One is this first year is the final increase of the Title V permitting and non-Title V permitting fee increase. So we wanted to wait until that fee increase, after that fee increase took effect. Also, it'll give facilities time to, again, refine their emissions estimates as they're reporting to us. Perhaps there's be additional source testing to refine those estimates and give facilities time. This would give them approximately, a year and a half, almost 20 months to start to take a closer look. And we are committing to come back and revisit this fee level in the future and propose rebalancing it up and down as necessary, because there are some uncertainties going forward with the fluctuating nature of the toxics work, some of the work that California Air Resources Board is doing, and some of the revenue projections based on what we actually see reported in the future. So the impact of this fee, again, based on 2017 existing data, is you can see that there's about 40% of the facilities who see pretty much no difference or actually a fee reduction. About 70% of the facilities would be less than a $1,000 fee increase per year, but there are about 30% of the facilities that would see between $1,000 or more fee increase. The chart on the right shows the average difference by industry sector. We provided more detailed data as well to the stakeholders. And you can see the average difference across different sectors and the number of facilities that are reporting. So we have obviously received stakeholder feedback. Fee increases are inherently unpopular. So one set of feedback we received is, again, there could be this anticipated increased workload on source testing because of the refinement of some of the emission factors, as well as we already have a lot of source test approvals, and we have been working to try to get those out faster. So we do have a board resolution included that directs staff to review and update emission factors as appropriate in consultation with the working group. And I also have some proposed language, which I'll show in a moment, as an additional resolution based on some recent stakeholder feedback to help address this issue. We got another comment because the California Air Resources Board is also working on what they're calling the criteria and toxics reporting regulation. That's currently in process right now. It may require additional facilities to report. That is true. Our proposed amendments do not require that. But if CARB does require additional facilities to report, we will need, some fee recovery for that excess workload. So what we're proposing would help with that. But the newer facilities that are reporting are probably going to be the smaller facilities because we already require the larger facilities to report. They will have a much lower impact than these averages that I showed before because of their lower fees. We also got a comment that our legal authority regarding fees was overstated in the staff report. We strongly feel that this fee increase is supported by statute and case law on legal authority, and we're meeting all the legal requirements. There are have been questions about the justification for increased fees, and that these, but we feel these are really necessary to help recover these reasonable costs of the regulatory work and other work that the district does, and that it is an equitable way forward. We did provide more information as requested to where the potential revenue would go within the district. And again, the current fees fall short of those costs. So this shortfall, if allowed to continue, would have potential impacts on our overall program. We have received a request to extend the 3-year phase-in to 4 years. But as I mentioned before, we've already done 3 years, 1 year longer than required by statute, and a very generous provision in the first year to really have no fee increase. And again, we're going to come back and revisit this as we go forward in subsequent years to see if adjustments are needed. We got a comment about portable equipment should not be assessed toxics fees. We agree they're not currently required to be reported, and this amendment doesn't change this. And then we have a comment on additional time needed for more industry outreach to talk to people about this potential fee increase that is coming. We've already done 2 public consultation meetings. We did a webinar as requested by the board. We had very good participation in that webinar. And we've done everything we possibly can to get the word out that this is coming. However, even given that, we are recommending today, not in your package, a 1-month delay on only the portion of this toxic fee restructuring related to toxic emission fees as a delay into June. We're recommending that everything else in the budget and every other change to Reg 3 be adopted today. So the recommended actions are determine that these amendments that are being considered today, with the exception of the toxic fees, are adopted today, that we adopt the budget as Sujata described, adopt the proposed goals and priority objectives, amend the salary resolution, and approve all those other amendments in Reg 3 and Rule 209 except for the toxic emission fees. It's on the slide, continue this public hearing to June, but I do have some, just to be clear, resolution language that Paul will project that I'll read. Just be it further resolved that the portion of the proposed amended Rule 301 related to restructuring of toxic emissions fees are not approved at this time, and consideration of approval of this portion of proposed amended Rule 301 is continued until the June 7th, 2019 board meeting. Just reiterating what the slide said. And then finally, to address the issue of the source testing that has been brought up by stakeholders, and we're passing out a copy to board members now, but I will read it for the public. Be it further resolved that the executive officer is directed to assess the current source test submittal and approval process and develop a plan to set priorities for processing and evaluating the existing and anticipated inventory of source tests. The plan shall be developed in consultation with a working group and shall commit to a process and schedule to address the expected increase in source test review volume due to the restructuring of the toxic emission fees, including timeframes for reducing the current inventory of source tests, as well as targets for completion of reviews within specified periods of time. The plan shall be presented to the Stationary Source Committee within 6 months of adoption of the restructured toxic emission fee, which of course we are proposing to bring next month. That I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a number of people who would like to speak. Supervisor Hahn, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm new around here, so I'm still trying to figure this out. So what you just presented is part of the budget that we are approving, except where you've pulled out the toxic fees as a part of it. Is that correct? So we were just voting on the budget as it was presented along with your presentation and all those amendments.
So the projected future numbers in the budget do not include this fee increase.
Because you've pulled it out. Because you've said, well, in a month will it be a part of it?
No, Supervisor,
it.
it's not part of the 1920 budget at all, and it's not even projected in the 5-year projections. Because
So what is it?
it is just
Because the board has not yet approved this fee increase,
Okay.
it was not part of the
But once
budget
we
package.
approve it, it'll be a part of the
Yes.
budget.
Yes.
I got to tell you, as a newcomer, this was a very confusing presentation. I was ready to vote against the budget because I have a lot of issues with the fee increase. But now I'm glad that it's being bifurcated and we're going to have to approve it at a later date. And I will bring up my concern. So it seems to me there's about a $20 million gap between what the work the district should be doing versus the revenue that we're receiving. So on that note, I support raising fees on companies that continue to emit toxins so that we can do the work to help mitigate that. I think it's a really small increase knowing that we have this $20 million gap. If we're only going to raise it 4.4 million, that's all we're going to get extra. That's still a long way from filling the gap, in my opinion. If we ever want to talk about why we're even thinking about creating a district to generate more revenues, this is it. We don't have the money we need to do the work that I know my communities, particularly Paramount, and my communities around the refineries are expecting, needing, deserving for us to do. So that's one, and I'm wondering, what's it look? I don't think our polluters are paying their fair share. I really don't. The fact that we still have the dirtiest air, in the country, everyone's working as hard as they can to reduce emissions, yet our air is still toxic. So I think the polluters should be paying a lot more. They're not paying their fair share, in my opinion. So I'm wondering, where we are in terms of the ability to actually raise that so it comes closer to getting us the revenue we need to do the work. And then two, I'm not happy about the industry pushing back so that we don't even phase this in for 3 years. In the meantime, I got big issues still happening in my communities. And so if we have allowed the industry to say, oh, we're not even going to agree to kind of be a part of this for 3 years, that's, we wanted 2, right? Or the legislature wanted 2, industry pushed back, and so now it's 3. I wondered, is there a legal reason why we can't do a 2-year phase-in? Because I think we should. It's already too low, in my opinion, but the fact that we're giving them 3 years to begin paying these fees is very disturbing to me.
So the reason for the 3 years, we can typically do it over 2, and that's been historic. When we had the 30% increase, that was a large increase, in part necessitated by US EPA's review of our programs and said that we weren't recovering enough. And
So is there a legal reason why we can't do 2, a 2-year phase?
No, there's not a legal reason why we couldn't do 2. But why we were proposing 3 is because we want to make sure that we have the time to understand what are the actual emissions during that year. So that's in part gets to the source.
We already know, like you said, there's already a $20 million gap from what the work we need to be doing versus the revenue that's coming in from fees.
A lot of what's being done is based on emission factors, their projections. And so that's where, based on previous data that's been collected by other agencies and have set these factors, what a lot of the concern about is that by raising these fees, and the whole goal is to reduce those emissions, by raising these fees, people are going to be much more focused and aware on, are they actually emitting these compounds? And so they want to actually test as opposed to using an emission factor. And if they test and they can demonstrate that those emissions are much lower, then their fees could be lower. So what we were trying to do is to come up with sort of a first approach to see what are the real emissions that are out there, what does industry do with regards to reducing those emissions.
Well, wait a minute,
and
we
then
already
come
know.
back.
Don't we already know by now what the emissions are in our air?
Well, when we're looking at
I
toxics,
mean, there's a lot of studies that have already happened that give us that information, right?
I would say that we really don't know. We have a good
Really?
sense of what's out there, but as Paramount showed, we thought we understood what all the hexachrome emissions were from the sources. But when we actually did that testing, that in fact wasn't the case. So this is where, again, the source testing becomes critical because it gives us an idea and
Well, again,
confirms.
I'll go on record saying I can't vote to approve this part of it. I don't think they're high enough, and I don't approve of the 3-year phase-in. I think we're letting the industry off the hook way too much. Again, I only know this because I represent these communities, and I came before the hearing board here on Paramount. Nobody ever had before, and then I found out that 300 times the level of hexachromium were being emitted into the city of Paramount. So we have a lot of work to do, and we don't have the revenue to do it. And who knows where this bill is going to end up, whether or not we'll ever have the authority to have a district to find another source of revenue. So this is an area, at least, where I think we should push back a little bit on the industry. But we're not voting on it today, right?
You're correct.
Thank you, Chair. So I know to get to the cost recovery of $20 million, it's going to take a bit of time. But do we have the breakdown? How did you ascertain the $20 million figure? Do we have a breakdown of that? If not, can you provide
Yes.
that?
So in the slide, and roughly in the slide, you can see how it's broken down. We can back up. In terms of expenditures, back one more. Oops, there. On the right, you could see the total revenue, but then on the left, you could see whether it's outreach, with the AB 617 program, permitting, public affairs, legal compliance, planning and rules lab, and monitoring. The staff report lays it out in a little more detail, but we did an analysis of the types of toxics works that the different divisions do that come out of, once we find out that there's a toxics issue through the reporting.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if we can get a more detailed breakdown within each category would be helpful. So to go from the 500,000 where we are now to the 4.5 million is a huge jump. I think there are about 1,500 facilities that are affected. So for most of the facilities, it's probably pretty small. They can budget for it. I think for some of the entities, though, especially with the additional source testing and related fees on that end of things, it may be significant for some of the smaller facilities. Is that correct?
Well, it could be, but if you look at, for instance, in this chart on the right, where it says the maximum difference, there are some large numbers there for even some small facilities, but some of those come from reporting using these default emission factors. So the facilities can continue to use those default emission factors, but if there's more of a fee impact because of that, they will have options whether they want to conduct source tests. We will also look at those source tests as they come in and see if our default factors need to be updated. So not everybody has to do the source test. Eventually, we can develop some more updated emission factors that everybody can use.
Okay, and then I forgot, what is the current backlog on the source testing?
I don't have that number.
Is it 2 months, 4 months?
It's a good question, Supervisor, and at this point, I would say we don't have a good answer for you. And in part, that's what the resolution was showing. And let me sort of address that. Source testing is addressed by 3 groups primarily: compliance and enforcement. We also look at it from a rulemaking perspective, and then we also look at it from permitting. So depending on the priority, for instance, if there's a high priority enforcement action going on, that's going to bump everything. And so this is sort of the reason why we have looked at this issue in terms of it wasn't exactly set up to be addressed in a very methodical way. And so what we proposed in the revised resolution was to go back to assess how we're looking at the prioritization of source tests within us as a function, and then to come back and to report to the board on a process that we believe would streamline that process and allow us to move forward in a way that addresses both the permitting, the rulemaking, and the compliance and enforcement. This was very similar to when about 3 years ago, we had a very high permit backlog, and we had to really come in and sort of assess, all right, what's going on here? And we came back, we utilized working groups, and it was a very successful process. Within 2 years, we reduced it by over 50%. So we want to propose the same type of process. We would report back to the stationary committee on the progress, but what we had said in the resolution was that within 6 months, we would have a plan forward on how we're going to actually address the issue in terms of even adequately defining what the challenge is.
Okay, so at this point, you don't know if you need more personnel resources or equipment? We don't know.
We have a lot of good ideas, but we don't know exactly. We've lost some people within our testing area, so we need to make sure that we've got the people. And then I think we just need to make sure that we've got the right way to prioritize how this is all being done.
Okay, so if a facility needed source testing today, they would go into the queue. What is the estimate today in the queue? Because you're going to report back to that facility, well, thank you for your application. We're going to work on the source testing, and it's going to be 4 months before we can get back to you, or 2 months. Or do we have any indication or no?
So the way that you described it would be a permitting type aspect. And I would ask Dr. Tsopoulos, within our permitting timeframes, we have a commitment.
Yes, I can help answer that, Wayne. For the current way we do source tests, it's non-expedited priority, it's 1 to 4 months. If it's non-expedited, non-priority, 2 to 8 months. If they ask for expedited review, it's 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, and I'm assuming there's an extra fee if it's expedited?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
Do you have any further questions?
Okay,
Supervisor?
let's see. No, I think that should do it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Benoit, you knocked yourself out of line there.
I did, I
You were up
apologize.
next.
Wayne, along those same lines, I'd like to further make sure that we do get back to stationary source. I know 6 months, I hear that for like a final review, but if we could hear back more regularly at stationary source, how this process is going. I'd also like to maybe talk about, we did some great stuff with the permitting department where we created some dashboards.
Yep.
I think this is another great opportunity for that, so we can, as a body, know where we're at going forward, and once we figure out where we want to get to, and have that dashboard to show that and those goals. So I know Lockie's back there shaking his head, and no problem, because he's already played this game once. But it definitely sounds like, from my perspective, something we need to work on. And another thing I'd like to talk about too, in my understanding is if they want to present their own source testing, they submit that to the air district separately, and then that has to get reviewed by the same people that do our testing. Is there any way to digitize that system? My understanding right now is they hand in basically a paper document, and we have to look at it through paper. Lockie, to me, it sounds like this may be an opportunity to get that on the web, maybe even to have the web server itself do some of the math to make sure that, hey, these ones are within parameters and we're almost good to go just by looking at it on the computer. Could be a much faster way to do that. And then maybe only the computer then just kicks out the ones that say, hey, these are out of parameter, this math is incorrect. And that might help get us also a lot further along and a lot faster along in those operations. So don't worry, Wayne, Lockie's back there shaking his head yes the whole time, so.
And I would just add, Councilman, that part of what we did in the engineering review was to try to understand what are some of the processes that we can utilize to streamline it. And there were a lot of software improvements. We did put things that are online. And that's what I would propose that we do on this particular aspect is, let's go through that review. Let's find out where those opportunities exist. We can report back to the Stationary Source Committee on a monthly basis on our progress. And I think that would address the concerns that we're hearing with regards to the timing, the expectations, and it would actually streamline the process overall.
Very good, thank you.
Councilmember Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be brief and save most of my comments for June when we address this again. But if you could bring up the slide again with the $20 million breakdown. So in looking at this slide, all the blue area is tied to AB 617, correct?
Correct.
And I assume maybe some of the green might also slightly be legislative. We're spending a little bit of money in some of these other departments that are somewhat tied to AB 617. Is that a fair assumption, or would it all be captured in the blue area?
Yeah, so the blue is separate. It's the AB 617 anticipated workload. So one of the ways we've been able to start the AB 617 program is we have been fortunate enough in Sacramento to get some funding to get AB 617 off the ground. Sure. We have 2 years of funding and hopefully a third year of funding. But the issue is that there's two issues. One is they're giving us that money year by year. There's no guarantee that the legislature is going to agree in the following year to cover that blue part of the chart. The second piece is that when we add up the AB 617 efforts, which are bigger than that blue chart, because this is just the toxics effort, the legislature is still not giving us enough. Like they gave us $20 million last year and hopefully $20 million this year, but we estimate it's about a $30 million per year effort to fully implement AB 617.
Okay, so is this blue area basically the unfunded part that we're talking about? So the legislature is giving us 20, but we have 30 million in expenditures?
This is just looking at the expenditures, assuming that funding, it's not secured in future years.
So then if I understand correctly, for the next 2 years, that this is somewhat being funded by the state, but long-term, we're not so sure.
It would be less than the next 2 years, I would say. We have a promise of 20 million this year that's not in place yet, I believe, right?
Yeah, the challenge that we have is that the legislature expects the districts to raise their fees to address these program costs. And so even though we're requesting more funding, they're looking to action by the districts. So the previous year's funding, we had requested 75 million, but there was 50 million that was distributed statewide. And all of the districts were able to show that the costs far exceeded the amount of funds that was provided by the state. And this is for the implementation aspect that we're talking about, because the incentive funding portion is actually much higher, where we're now currently asking for 400 million as opposed to 200 million statewide. So part of this effort is designed to address the legislature's concerns that we are doing our fair share to try to address the fees aspect and still look to the state to also contribute the funding for this program that was developed and mandated by them.
Okay, so maybe for June, if I could just get, I think it was already somewhat requested, but just a better understanding of what funding we have and where the shortfall is. So as an example, all this AB 617 expenditure is pretty new since I've been on the board. We didn't magically find 10 million plus from our budget. So, the funding's coming from somewhere or we're cutting from somewhere because we still essentially kind of have a balanced budget, so to speak. Right. And so I just want to have a more clear understanding of that. That'll really help me a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Councilman, I would say that a lot of the funding savings have come from the FTE savings, where we haven't been able to be fully staffed, and we utilize some of those savings to address it. So we do need to try to increase the funding level, and then that's why we're still trying to hire more people as well.
Supervisor Rothenberg.
Thanks. I appreciate the thoughts of handling this the same way we did with the permit backlog. I think that was a tremendous success, and I would hope we can accomplish that same thing here. That's a great thought. I'm not entirely clear on how this happens. If a company needs testing, they contact us and we test, or they contract with someone to do testing?
Yeah, typically, Supervisor, it's the latter. They hire an approved testing company, and then we review the source test.
When you say approved testing company, so we have a list of companies that we say, do this testing, do it well, or trustworthy?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's approved protocols, there's also approved labs and our testing firms. They hire them, and then once they produce the report, our engineers review that report.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to flip our process to make it a little more time sensitive. Instead of reviewing each individual report, could we move to a system whereby we certify those companies and then we audit them regularly to make sure that their results are testworthy, and instead of having to individually certify each test?
For the simple, easy equipment, we can do that. But in most instances, we have to look at each equipment on a case-by-case basis and make the necessary adjustments.
Well, if we could throw that into the mix, at least as you said, for the simple ones, if that takes away a certain amount of the work and leaves us more staff available to do the big stuff, that might be an
Absolutely.
approach to take. Thank you.
Very good. Supervisor Hahn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I still am concerned about this $20 million shortfall and what has to give for us to have a balanced budget when this all becomes part of it. And I hope the giving would not come from the area that our communities are most depending on us for. In that light, I would actually like to make a motion that when this comes back, we reduce the phase-in back to 2 years, and then maybe a report in 6 months on looking at the idea of readjusting these fees to meet the needs that we've been tasked with doing.
Second.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk open the roll?
Mr. Chair, we do have public speakers on this item. Would that be
Oh.
appropriate to take those first?
But not on her motion. We have, her motion only relates to an amendment.
Let's ask the attorney if we can take that.
Okay.
Take the item?
So,
yes.
Since we're not voting on it today, I don't know if we.
Are we not voting on his request that we delay it till June?
So we could make that part of that motion.
Right.
I think that
Right.
would work.
Right, so when it
Thank
comes,
you.
yeah, thank you.
But do we need to take the public testimony first?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll start with Mr. Eder and Michael Carroll at the other microphone.
Okay, good morning again. My name's Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. I've been working on solar policy for over 45 years in California. Is PM a toxic 2.5? The thousands of deaths each year in the district staff says it's from PM 2.5. Okay? PM goes for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a ton. That's $150 to $250 a pound, 10, 20 times as much. That's what the market has given us. So these numbers are way too low. You've never evaluated natural gas as toxics. We import over 90%, 95% into the state. It's against the health and safety laws to use it. There's 53,002B that said it's against state policy. This was in 81, Roberti was involved, and to import fossil fuels into the state. This stuff with renewable natural gas is just bull. They're taking credit for emitting stuff into the atmosphere versus they should be putting it in the ground, but at least the middle ground of burning it. Anyway, so in terms of goals for the district, the goal is equitable, just, immediate total conversion. And in the work that I did with the PUC 40 years ago, in 1981, February, we said, that the tax incentives, just the savings alone have to be leveraged. And anyway, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here a little bit, but I've got to. So you should state this as the goal for the district. Also, there are public entities that have used and set a precedent for investing their funds, like CalPERS, the district's funds. There's possibility to get income using solar and in this conversion. And there's an issue that the state has to deal with in the culture of there's a lot of savings here, especially in transportation. there's a big margin. Who's going to get that margin? Key bono. Who benefits? Is it going to be the millionaires, the billionaires, and the insurance companies and banks, or is it going to be the people, especially low and middle income people? There's been no increase in middle income. They've stagnated for the last 30 years. We put Piketty's book of the 21st century capital into the records in 16 plan. Everything that we've ever done with the district's incorporated by reference, still concerning litigation. Thank you. Any questions? Stopped at 5 seconds. Oh, over 5. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, would Mr. Lamar come to the vacant microphone? Mr. Carroll?
Good morning. Mike Carroll with Latham & Watkins on behalf of the Regulatory Flexibility Group, which is an industry coalition comprised of aerospace, utility, and refining businesses. We are very supportive of staff's proposal to address the source test issue. We think that having a precise understanding of what the level of emissions are in the basin is very important for a lot of reasons, well beyond the implications that it has for the payment of fees. So we're very supportive of that proposal, and we thank staff for bringing that forward to the board today. I would also like to say, with respect to whether or not the sources are doing their fair share, I assume that the relevant inquiry is whether they're doing their fair share to achieve our air quality objectives. And I would just remind you that the payment of fees to the district doesn't result in any direct emission reductions. What results in emission reductions are the installation of controls and the implementation of the rules that this board has adopted. And the businesses that are paying these fees, that's not all they're doing to clean up the air. They're implementing projects to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars to implement the most recent adjustments to the reclaim allocations, and they will be implementing new projects far in excess of that to implement the new Regulation 11 rules that have been coming before this board over the last year and getting adopted. So when we want to talk about whether or not these sources are doing their fair share, let's not look just at whether or not they're covering all the district's administrative expenses, but let's look at what they're doing to reduce emissions, to help us achieve our air quality goals. And let's look at that relative to their contribution from other sources that may not be paying at the same level that they should be relative to their own contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I'm a little unclear about the supervisor's motion, but let me just say that if that proposal is actually coming before a vote, we would oppose shortening the period from 3 years to 2 years, although I'm not sure that it's really coming for a vote at this point, but just for the record.
Your testimony.
Thank you.
Would Bridget McCann come to the vacant microphone? Mr. Lamar?
Good morning, Dr. Burke, board members. I'm Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance. I'm also a member of the Budget Advisory Committee. I usually limit my comments to commending staff for their efforts to control costs, but the magnitude and potential harm that these proposed toxic fees will have on small businesses can't be ignored. Staff's concern over the decline in revenue and their desire to correct this condition is one that's all too familiar to small business owners. Our colleagues have asked staff to reduce the source testing backlog and develop a plan for expediting the process. We support them because the cost for one source test can range from $5,000 to as much as $30,000 or $40,000. When you multiply that by the pieces of equipment and the host of emissions that require testing, the cost to a small business can easily be 5 to 6 figures. Moreover, there will be non-operational days, as many as 2-3 days during this process, and then it takes weeks or months for staff to evaluate the results. In Rule 1147, this board asked staff to explore alternatives to source testing and report back. That was in 2011. While progress is being made on some issues, we're still waiting for an answer to that question. We are interested in the concept of testing from a pool of sources, which could significantly reduce the time and the cost for small businesses. The idea of using default factors is not without its drawbacks. Emission factors are usually overly conservative, and staff admits that many of their factors are outdated. Facilities can easily over-report their emissions. And to complicate matters, CARB and the air districts don't always agree on the way emissions should be calculated. In 2017, CARB and this agency disagreed about a factor for calculating onboard refueling vapor recovery emissions for gas stations. They promised to reach a decision by the end of that year. We've never been apprised if a decision was ever reached. At our Budget Advisory Committee meeting, we urged staff to extend the phase-in period on the toxic fee increases by an additional year. Up until now, staff wasn't receptive to our proposal, and we're grateful now that they've changed. In one of their slides, you saw some facilities in the manufacturing sector could see their fee increase 115 more times than what they are today. Staff will tell you that's a worst-case scenario, but when you're talking about increases anywhere near that magnitude, there's no best-case scenario, certainly not for small businesses. Staff is telling you they need more money to do the work that's required, yet up until now, they haven't defined the scope of the work, nor have they shown you a plan for doing it, or given any milestones for completing it, only that they're committed to doing it. We would ask you to approve the 3.5% CPI increase, and we're thankful to staff for making these concessions to allow us additional time, or them additional time, to complete a plan and establish a working group, and we hope that we'd be a part of that working group. Thank you.
Would Ms. Keeler come to the vacant microphone? Ms. McCann?
Good morning, I'm Bridget McCann, Manager of Technical and Regulatory Affairs for WISPA. WISPA concurs with the previous comments that were made by Mike Carroll in RFG. We've participated in the Regulation 3 rulemaking process, and we attended the public consultation meetings, the budget advisory meetings, and governing board budget workshops. We also provided verbal and written comments, which were submitted on April 23rd, and we thank staff and the board for consideration of the comments. We appreciate the changes and recommendations that were made today by staff, and we look forward to working with them in the next month about the different source testing issues with the working group. We also support an approach similar to the permit streamlining task force, and we would like the issue with CARB that's currently going on, the CTR rulemaking, to be included with updating emission factors. When it comes to shortening the implementation time, we would not be able to support that. We would want to have the 3-year or actually 4-year implementation time to be considered. Stakeholders need time to look at whether source testing or the updated emission factors would be best for them for reporting their toxics inventory. Thank you.
While Ms. Keeler is testifying with Christopher Chavez, please come to the vacant microphone.
Good morning, Chairman Burke and members of the governing board. I'm Frances Keeler, 3 weeks in as the vice president, new vice president for SEEB. SEEB has been participating again in all of the workshops, and we appreciate all the hard work that staff has put in to bring in a budget that keeps to the CPI increase. We appreciate also that staff recognizes there's still a little bit of work to be done to work out the toxics fee, and appreciate their amendments, and we do support the staff's proposal as amended. Thank you.
Would Mr. Carlo De La Cruz come to the vacant microphone while Mr. Chavez is testifying?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Chris Chavez. I'm the Deputy Policy Director for the Coalition for Clean Air. We signed on to a letter regarding this item. We support increasing the toxic fees. However, like Supervisor Hahn, who I am a constituent of, question whether or not those fees are sufficient. Big polluters should be paying more of what it costs AQMD to regulate them. Certainly, our community members who are exposed to these toxins pay through their health costs and quality of life. We also strongly oppose delaying implementation to 3 years and would urge for this fee schedule to be implemented as soon as possible, which is consistent with this board's past practice. So thank you very much for your time, and certainly look forward to continuing to engage in this issue through June.
While Mr. De La Cruz is testifying, will Carl Lanny come to the vacant microphone?
Good afternoon, Chair Burke and members of the board. My name is Carlo Dela Cruz, and I'm representing the Sierra Club. On behalf of the Sierra Club, I want to welcome the newest board members, Ms. Delgado and even Ms. Bartlett. I don't believe we've had a chance to introduce ourselves, but we want to just say that we support the work of the toxics divisions of the South Coast AQMD, that the work is really vital. And as the previous speaker said, it is not the collection of these fees themselves that results in emission reductions, but it is the hard work of the staff, as well as the technology and implementation measures being implemented. That said, it is still far too cheap to pollute and it's far too expensive to breathe unhealthy air. I don't need to reiterate the numbers, but many of you know these numbers, that over 12 million Californians still breathe unhealthy air. Over 5,000 Southern California residents die every year from lung ailments such as asthma and other respiratory diseases. These fees are only a small attempt at trying to get what other speakers will like to say the sources, but other community members will call polluters and industry businesses that are killing the neighbors. And so let's remind ourselves that the true cost is already being borne by the residents who can't afford their health bills, who can't afford to take a day off of school or work, and therefore are paying the hidden cost of air pollution. As Supervisor Hahn already said, Southern California is one of the most polluted regions in the country in terms of air quality. It has held that record for 19 of the 20 years that the American Lung Association has done that report. So we really encourage the board to consider that fees are one of the most efficient and direct ways of recouping the true cost of air pollution. As you've already discussed earlier in your board, things like sales tax measures and getting authority from the state are complicated and messy procedures. And so one of the most direct and efficient way we can really clean up our air is by placing these fees on the polluters themselves, rather than asking 18 million residents to pay sales tax increase first. Thank you again, and welcome the newest members of the board.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lanning.
Good morning. I'm Carl Laney with Montrose Environmental Group. We're an emissions testing company, and we also prepare emissions inventories for several hundred facility operators in California. I'm here today to also represent, to some extent, AT&T, who is regulated by the district. We support SEEP's position on this rule today. Specifically the bifurcation of the toxics section of the rule. We feel, based on our experience, there are many people who will be affected by the toxics rule who don't even know it yet. In addition to that, AB 617 is likely to bring in even more unsophisticated people into the fee process, again, who don't understand the deficiencies of data that's available today, or even deficiencies in reporting processes. I would like for the district during this next month to also take another look at the implications for emergency operations and emergency equipment. I think the costs may be higher than we're assuming today. We're also in support of at least a 3-year phase-in period. Again, the data that we have to work with today, the data that we've been working with in the past, may have been suitable under an old fee structure, but it's highly unsuitable and inequitable with the fee structure that the district's proposing. Reference value that your regulated community uses reflects technologies in many cases that could be 30 years old, does not reflect the technologies that we have implemented in the South Coast Basin, and overstates emissions and unequitably would overstate costs. We also recognize that many facilities, to resolve this, would have to go through a testing program. Testing programs themselves are very expensive when we talk about toxics emissions. Companies need to make very, very difficult decisions about the economics of maybe casually reporting fees or emissions and paying higher fees, or collecting accurate data so that the district has good planning data and people are being assessed as equitable costs. So once again, we're supporting bifurcation of the rule and at least a 3-year phase-in period. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. That concludes our testimony. Supervisor Hahn is asked to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to clarify or sort of change my motion, although I did get a second. So, but what I would like us to do is, my motion would say, direct staff to come back and let us vote on the two proposals for the length of time to phase it in. Bring back the 3 years and bring back the 2 years, so this board could vote on both of those.
Can I ask for a clarification? Is that moving the
The
budget?
clarification of the clarification of the clarification.
Yes. So it's moving the budget as proposed, and then with regards to the toxics fees, then all that applies,
Bring
right?
back that in June. Is that when it's coming back, in June? With allowing this body to vote on the two proposals, the 3-year phase-in and the 2-year phase-in. But I also like the part about the 6 months, even kind of looking at the fees, and the idea that those could be revisited at some point. Does that make sense? Or is that more confusing?
Yeah, and just to, so I think it's probably easiest maybe if we take the toxic fee portion of Rule 301 as a separate issue and maybe move the other item first, and then what I think what you're saying is fine, but just to clarify, even if you didn't make a motion,
The 3 years would come back.
yeah, the 3 years would come back. if
Well,
the
I want,
board-
yeah, but what I want is the ability to vote on both of the phase-in year proposals, a
Yeah, and I-
3-year and a 2-year.
And I think we can bring that back for the board. I think that's fine. But just to remind, the board has discretion in terms of, when the district staff brings proposals to the board, the board ultimately has discretion if they want to tweak things, as long as they're, within the realm of the law. And so just because staff makes a recommendation of 3 doesn't mean the board can't say, hey, we want to go 2, or hey, we want to go 4, or hey, we want to go 3.5, or 2.5, as long as there's support in the record for that. I just wanted to
Got it.
clarify that.
I just don't think there was support necessarily today to immediately get to the 2-year phase-in. But I think when it comes back, there'll be a little more time for everyone to digest it and hear back from, their stakeholders and communities, so that we can vote on both of those in June. While we, some of us may, I don't know if I'm going to, but some of us may vote to approve the fees. That's going to be part of the report, but I think the phase-in is separate. So do I need another second, or is that a clarification to the clarification?
I accept them. Can you put up just on the screen again what the recommendations were you had before, just so we're all clear? I think Philip had it up there,
Well,
one of your
sounds
final slides.
It sounds like Bay's asking for this to be separate from the entire budget plus
Yeah,
these recommendations.
right.
Should we just go ahead and take a vote on just that right now, Bay?
I think that's cleaner.
On which part we're taking a vote on now? Which one?
Just the budget.
Just the budget, right?
No.
Or what?
The budget, the goals and objectives, and the salary modifications.
And is that in this proposed recommendations here?
Yeah.
Each bullet point, right?
But the toxic fees are not a
They're
part of
separate.
this.
They're not in there.
Correct.
So the first 4 bullet points,
1, 2, 3, 4.
all of them?
So this requires a separate motion for these bullet points plus the 2 further be resolves that were presented to us?
Yes, so it would be the first 4 bullet points and the first clause of the 5th bullet point.
But no, aren't you, we're agreeing to continue the hearing, right? So.
I think we want to pass
That's
the
what we're
budget
trying to do,
today,
right.
but withhold a vote on the toxics rule. Is that what that's the right
All the
course?
other Regulation 3 changes could be adopted today. We're only recommending continuing the toxics fee restructuring that's been the topic of debate.
Correct, okay.
So as Bay
Someone
had
just
said,
make a motion to that effect?
the top 4, yeah.
Okay.
I'll move that.
I'll
We already
second
have a
that.
motion on the floor and a second for the other
Oh, I thought
right?
you withdrew that motion, sorry.
So it's,
So we have a motion on the floor on Supervisor Hahn's motion, which I thoroughly am confused on.
Oh, come on.
What you want to do is just bring
I-
it back when it comes back and be able to
With two,
vote
yeah.
on, okay, I got that.
Yeah.
Would the clerk open the roll?
On who's,
For
who's
just,
voting on
just
the-
Supervisor Hahn's motion that we come back
Yes.
with either two
That
or
we
three
direct
options.
staff-
That's what we're voting
back in
on
June.
currently.
That we direct staff, when they come back in June, that this board will be allowed to
Right.
vote on the
Right.
phase-in.
Got that?
Mr. Chair, could we
So-
have a clarification of the motion?
Sure.
I don't
Okay.
understand what we're voting on.
We need the motion stated one more time.
We are, I move that we direct staff to come back with the toxic fee portion.
What about the rest of this stuff?
We're gonna take another motion on that in just a minute.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
that-
think
no,
we're,
that's
well,
a separate vote.
that's a separate
Separate
vote.
vote.
Right, this is
Would
my
the clerk
motion.
open the roll?
Yeah,
The actions that are up there are not what we're taking an action on right now, right?
Right.
Yes, they are. The first 1, 2,
no, we have to take mine first, right? I think you have to
Right.
take
No,
mine first.
she's first.
Yeah.
She's first.
Can we take that off the
Okay?
screen, Paul? Because that's not what we're voting on right now.
Yeah, right.
It's helping adding to the confusion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think the recommendation from staff, not that we have to follow it, but the recommendation is that we move forward with the first 4 bullet points
Right,
first.
we
Well, we
got,
already have a motion on
Right.
the
But we
table, so I'm
already
trying to
have-
Well,
dispense
and
with
then,
that
but
motion.
then Mayor Mitchell had a motion after, so I would consider that to be a substitute, even though she didn't use the word substitute,
but
because her
mine was,
motion came after Supervisor Hahn,
We were
so
that close to voting
but-
on the first one being done.
that's how I
Is there a
would-
substitute motion on the floor I'm not aware of?
No, there's no substitute motion on the floor.
Well, this is all procedural, obviously, but I think Supervisor Hahn had a motion on the floor that hasn't been withdrawn, and so.
So she'd like to
Right.
vote on
That
that.
still
Yeah.
is out there, so, and her motion
Right.
is simply that when this toxics fee structure comes back to us in June, that the staff is directed to bring back the option for us to vote a 2-year phase-in as opposed to a 3-year phase-in. So that's a motion that's on the floor right now.
Sure, and our legal counsel was saying that we already have that option. We always have that option to go above or less than, so I kind of feel like it's already there, but again, I was just trying to stick to the procedure that was being suggested to us.
So we have a motion and a second. The clerk has opened the roll. We're voting on Ms. Hahn's motion.
just vote yes. You won't regret it.
Motion. Close the roll.
Supervisor Hahn, can you lock in your vote?
Oh, right.
You're not voting, you're not voting for yourself? Ms. Hahn, did you vote?
I
Got
did.
it. Yep.
Okay. Do you have that, the clerk? What is the vote?
10-1.
10-1. Okay, that motion passes. So now we want the motion on the 4 items that are on the screen, right?
Plus the 2 resolutions.
Plus the 2 resolutions.
can you put it back on, please?
Coming up, just 1 second.
And
It's
did you-
really
Did you already make a
5.
motion on this, or?
The blue one.
Judy is about to make a
I'm
motion.
happy to make a motion on this that we, including these two amendments to the resolutions.
Everything but Rule 301.
I move that we adopt all of these actions
Addressing the
that are on the
toxic
board,
portion.
accepting the toxics rule structure,
Right.
and that motion includes the 2 added
And I'll second.
resolutions.
We have a motion and a second on all the items on the
hold on.
screen except the last one, plus the 2 motions that were, amendments that were passed out by the clerk. Would the clerk
No,
open the roll?
Mr. Chairman, I think that we need to include the 5th bullet point in that.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think that we need to include the 5th bullet point in this motion, not taking it out. Just the part about the 301 that we just addressed with
Right,
Supervisor
because
Hahn.
it says except for
Yeah.
those addressing the toxic emissions,
Yeah.
so that's what we want.
Yeah, so we need to
Right,
include
includes
all
all.
5 bullet points.
And just so it's clear for the record, we're showing on the record recommendations. We're going to include 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullet points. The last bullet point that's indented, we're not going to include that. So when somebody looks at this record in 6 years, they're going to know what we said.
Sorry, the last bullet point includes the continuation.
Include the last one.
So you would be voting on that last one with the change.
So you're going to include all 6 of the bullet
All
points,
6, plus, can you show this?
the 2
Yeah.
resolutions?
The entire page.
The entire page, plus this one recommended,
For the record, the entire page of recommendations, so it's clear for the record.
plus
And
this proposal by staff that I gave during my presentation on the source testing.
Right.
And the additional be it resolved paragraph that you provided here.
Okay.
Okay,
We have a motion.
that's my motion.
That's your motion. And a second. The clerk has opened the roll. If you will. That motion passes 11-0. Took us a while to get there, but we got there.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just wanted to clarify my vote on Supervisor Hahn's motion. I voted to give her a chance to vote no on 3, and to give me a chance to vote yes on 3. So I just want to,
Okay.
that's why I voted yes.
Okay. We then now move on to item 29. We have some testimony. Who's doing the presentation? Okay.
Good morning. I'm right
you're
back
up again.
again. Nothing nearly as exciting as the previous item, but I'll try to make this brief. So this morning I'm talking about our proposed amendments for Rule 1106, which is a rule for marine and pleasure craft coatings, and also our proposed rescission of Rule 1106.1, which is a rule very specific to pleasure craft coatings. Some quick background, both these rules are designed to limit VOC emissions from coatings that are applied to marine vessels and pleasure craft. The rule covers both the manufacturers and the distributors and the folks that supply and sell these marine coatings, as well as the folks that use the coatings, so the shipyards, the boat yards, the marinas, et cetera. This rule, the 1106, was last amended in 1995, 1106.1 in 1999, but as I'll talk a little bit later in this presentation, we had been conducting a rulemaking in 2015 on this, and this is effectively picking up from that October 2015 rulemaking. So a purpose of our proposed amendments, really about clarifying the rule language, making it clear who this rule applies to, how you comply, making sure that the limits are updated to meet the US EPA control technique guidelines and NESHAP requirements, and then also enhancing enforceability, so making sure that we prohibit the possession and sale of non-compliant coatings, which is consistent with how we've treated other South Coast coating rules. So the previous rulemaking that I mentioned in 2015, during that process, we observed a lot of noncompliance with the existing requirements of 1106 and 1106.1, and so that's where we got the idea that we needed to make some changes to be able to improve clarity and make it clear what's needed. We also noted that entities were sometimes just completely unfamiliar with the rule requirements, that these were applicable to them. In that process, we identified some areas of improved clarity, as well as limits that we would update to be consistent with EPA requirements. And we worked pretty extensively with industry stakeholders to address their concerns within the proposed amendments. When this rule came before a public hearing before the board in 2015, stakeholders expressed some concerns with additional record-keeping requirements and reporting requirements that we had proposed. No other concerns at the time were expressed with this rulemaking, so we took this rule back, saying we would go reconsider those additional requirements. We're just bringing this rulemaking back before you today. So in terms of this current rulemaking effort, as I mentioned, we're picking up from that 2015 rulemaking. The proposal is very similar to what was before you in 2015, but for the fact that we've dropped those additional record-keeping and labeling requirements that were problematic for stakeholders. We've conducted 2 working group meetings, a public workshop, and this rule has also gone through a review from Stationary Source Committee. We did get concerns that were raised by one stakeholder, and I'll go into how we've addressed those. So the concerns were both regarding energy curable coatings, these UV, EV, LED cure materials. Normally with coatings, you apply them and they evaporate and dry and harden. These are coatings that don't need to dry. They're designed to be cured by application of an energy source, so UV lights or EB lights. For these, because these coatings are a little different, they tend to be very relatively low in VOCs. This particular industry stakeholder asked for an exemption, that these types of coatings be exempt from the rule requirements. We agreed that it was appropriate to have an exemption for these types of coatings if they are less than 50 gram per liter VOC content. That's fairly low compared to the other limits that we have for other coatings. We do require that these energy curable coatings demonstrate that they're able to meet that 50 gram per liter level by providing formulation data and also the results of an ASTM test method that's developed specifically for these coatings so that we can assure that they are actually below the 50 gram per liter level. The second issue addressed was also involved the energy curable coatings, and it was about how you demonstrate compliance and wanting to incorporate this specific ASTM test method as a compliance method. The problem with that is that EPA is very explicit that they don't consider this particular test method to be appropriate for compliance. Energy curable coatings, again, are a little different from regular coatings, and so it's a bit tricky, particularly with the thin film ones, to establish exactly what their VOC content is. But we feel comfortable that combining this ASTM method that was developed specifically for these coatings, as well as having manufacturer-provided formulation data, will be sufficient for us to determine what the VOC contents of these materials are. In terms of impact, this rule is really administrative in nature. We're not expecting to see emission impacts or changes in emissions as a result of this. The reason is these are really niche products. There's not a lot of usage for them. Also, the VOC limits that we're changing to match EPA limits, those products are already in existence and being used by the industry. Not considering any cost impact, again, already there's compliant products being used by the industry and available in the market, and we're not expecting there to be a change in price. So our recommendation is to certify the revised final environmental assessments and to amend Rule 1106 and then rescind 1106.1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions by my colleagues on this staff presentation? We have testimony.
Larry, did you have a question?
Larry?
Your thing's on.
Mayor McCallum? That was
That's
the
left
the
over
last
previously,
one, huh?
but I'll go ahead
Okay,
and
Paul,
move
you
the
gotta
item.
get on your toes here. Would Mr. Etter and Rita Loof come to the vacant microphones? Ms. Loof, why don't you start?
Did you want me to go first?
Yeah. Harvey was taking
Good
his time
morning.
getting there.
Good morning, I'm Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RadTech International. And RadTech represents 800 companies in North America involved in the ultraviolet electron beam and LED industry. As staff mentioned, we're energy curable materials. We're not only compliant, we're super compliant. On page 8 of the rule proposal, you'll see some of the VOC limits at 400, 560, 730 grams per liter. We're at less than 50 typically. With that comes the added problem of the testing, which the current testing is just not set up for our types of very low VOC products. So that was the only issue that really we had concerns with. In 2015, this rule came before the board, and we were pleased to find out that Chairman Burke was a boat owner. So he really understood the issues that the industry was facing. And I have to say that I'm pleased to withdraw our opposition to this rule today, and that staff has worked with us very diligently to address those issues. The only remaining one was the concern of our members being subject to enforcement action based on technicalities of test method issues. But staff has reassured us that that's not their intent, because if you just look at the compliance mechanism, we're compliant, we're super compliant. So that's not really our issue. Our issue would be to have enforcement action on potential confusion over which test method to use. But staff has reassured us that that is not, they don't expect that to be an issue, that they would not have enforcement action, or that's not their intent to enforce based on a technicality like that. So we appreciate the collaboration with staff, the 1106 team, and thank you to the board and assistants for their work on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Rita, I think you also owe Dr. Liu a thank you for that too. Because I know
Yes,
he worked very hard to
definitely.
make
And
sure.
Mark, his assistant as
And
well.
thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi there. It's Harvey Eder again, speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition, and for all those citizens that want to see immediate total solar conversion equitably and justly. Anyway, history on coatings. I mentioned before a unanimous Supreme Court case from 2012 of the state of California Supreme Court, and this is what I cited at the administrative committee meeting on BARCT. That they said it was the district case. The district was sued by coating manufacturers saying they can't meet the rules in this time and whatnot. And the court said you can meet the rules if they're not here in 135 when the rules are implemented and target dates. That if it's technology forcing, that's the important thing. So you have to use solar. It's cost effective, life cycle cost effective. We've proven it in the record in the federal government's Sunshot program through the Department of Energy. Also, so this is a precedent. It was the district's case, and you're not applying it to solar, and that's illegal. Also, there's deaths from your decisions or indecision, and we know it, and we know social costs and whatnot. In the 16 plan, it was $9 million per premature death. In the 7 plan, it was $7 million. It was $3.5 million in the 7 plan. Also, as I mentioned to you before, I talked to my brother, who's a commercial fisherman, and my nephew up in Oregon. And I've talked with him in reference to marine craft. We've got interest in working with air districts and whatnot, industry, in developing marine vessels that use alternative fuels. So they're doing this up in Portland as well, and it's part of what's going out at the biggest ports in the country that we have here. I'll talk to you in a minute.
Thank you. That concludes our testimony on this item. Open to a motion from my.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Staff recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to this item?
You know, are there any requests to speak by board members? Because the request to speak machine up
Yeah,
here is
the
not
machine
working.
is broken, so
Yeah.
we can't.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just want to double check.
Speak on everything.
You did. You
Yeah,
pressed on it
broke
too
the
much.
machine. You're not allowed to play in the sandbox anymore. Okay, hearing no opposition, this item is approved. We will then move to closed session.
Public comment. We have one
Public comment. We'll take public comment before we go into closed session. That would be Mr. Eder.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
This is Harvey Eder again for the Public Solar Power Coalition. I neglected to mention, and I had a little senior moment there, I guess, about natural gas as a toxin. The district CARB has never done a study of this.
You did mention that.
Okay.
You are having a senior moment.
Pardon?
You are having a senior moment.
Oh,
You did mention
maybe
that.
several.
Okay.
I think I mentioned it, but it's extremely important. Also, there was a meeting on these 2 years ago on these testing equipment, and in that meeting, they said that there was a paper there that said like 30 or 40 premature deaths per 100,000. So that's 300 to 400 per million. For the numbers like 850 that CARB uses for diesel. This is real bad number. As I mentioned, there's not only toxic and carcinogens, PM, especially 2.5, and benzene, and formaldehyde, which when I mentioned about a year ago, Dr. Burke wasn't aware that it was a cancerous and toxic in natural gas. So this is now we've got Aliso Canyon and the stuff going on.
you know, and it's not really being dealt with. And this is going to change, it could change the outcome of litigation and whatnot, but, you know, it's against the law to use it in the state. This book I mentioned by David Wallace Wells a couple months ago came out, The Uninhabitable Earth, a Planet After Warming. In the last 30 years, we've used half the fossil fuels in all of human history. We haven't done much in the last 30 years. We got to get down and do this now. Also, I heard, you know, there's been first of all, I'll give you a little poem. Some of you folks haven't been around, others have. The sun makes the wind blow, the water flow, and the plants grow. It's the engine of our ecosystem. It's the way the world works. All right? So, I'm sorry. Another senior moment. I'm just going to go sit down. I got a lot of stuff, you know, to tell you about, but these known admitted deaths, and you're not and what we call them, the air pollution's going down, and we got numbers going out. It's because of climate change, and it's going to get worse. And we've got to go to solar ASAP, and we've got to do it equitably, justly. Equity in our civilization, our country, our nation is threatened, and we cannot continue as a democracy as we have been without this. Thank you.
I think Mr. Nastry's going to have some interesting news for you.
I hear there's solar stuff going around, and you know, Dr. Burke told me this morning. He said, "Well, Wayne will tell you about it." I know. Hide the ball. What's going on? Nobody talked to me about it. You know where I come from, so I don't know what's up. But can Wayne answer now, so everybody can find out?
You know, I think you know how when you go to church, sometimes somebody sees the light. I think maybe Mr. Nastry went to church and saw the light. You know? So you know you can take credit for saving another soul. Thank you for your testimony, sir. Okay. Do we have closed session?
Yes, sir.
Wait a minute.
Okay, let's send this to closed session.
It is necessary for the board to recess to closed session pursuant to Government Code Sections 54956.9 sub A and 54956.9 sub D sub 1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation which has been initiated formally into which the South Coast AQMD is a party. The actions are in the matter of SC AQMD v. Aircraft Heat Treating Co., Inc. and Anaplex Corp., South Coast AQMD Hearing Board Case Number 6066-1, Order for Abatement. SC AQMD v. Anaplex Los Angeles Superior Court Case Number BC 608322, Paramount Hexavalent Chromium. People of the State of California, XREL SC AQMD v. Exide Technologies Inc., Los Angeles Superior Court Case Number BC 533528, in re Exide Technologies Inc., U.S. Bankruptcy Court, District of Delaware, Case Number 13-11482 KJC Bankruptcy Case. People of the State of California, XREL South Coast Air Quality Management District versus the Sherwin-Williams Company and Ohio Corporation and DOEs 1 through 50 inclusive, Los Angeles Superior Court Case Number PSCV 00136. A report of the reportable actions taken during closed session will be provided to the clerk of the board. The meeting is adjourned.